Jason stepped out onto the balcony. He had rarely been outside lately, unless the weather was neither too hot nor too cold. The man looked out over the tops of the sleeping trees. Buds were already waking up in some places. Spring had sprung. Soon his wife came out to him. "I'm going into town." "I have an appointment with a beautician," she smiled and poked her husband on the cheek. "Okay," he replied without much interest. "If it works out, be back by 3. The doctor's coming in today." "I'll try." "That's it. Bye." Jason watched Emily get into a red Mercedes and drive out the automatic gate. His malaise had turned into a real sickness. Someone shouted to him from the street, "Leave the old cherry tree alone." There are almost no buds on it, all fallen off, he showed with his hands. "First her, and then me," Jason whispered to himself to remind himself that he didn't have long to live. Over the past few days, the man had been thinking more and more about how he had taken a wrong turn once in his life. Yes, he, like everyone else, thought that happiness was in the money. He put a lot of effort into becoming a big man, and then it all came crashing down in an instant. "Your liver's failing," the doctor told him at the time. "You need serious treatment." And he was treated for 2 years, but there was no improvement. Jason was feeling better, and then he was getting worse. It wouldn't have mattered if it wasn't for the constant pain. It was unbearable. His liver was checked many times with tests and biopsies. No cirrhosis was found, but the organ refused to function normally. The day came when Jason stopped trusting conventional medicine. A good friend recommended an old Chinese man who practiced acupuncture. "Oh, it's bad," the grandfather said, examining his eyes. "Liver's all bad." Jason shrugged. The old Chinese man fussed around him, inserting needles in various places. The patient cried out in pain. "Be patient," the grandfather said. In a way, the Chinese man helped him get to a stable level from which there seemed to be no escape. Sure, Jason was fading, but not so fast. The grandfather did perform a miracle, but unfortunately the cure never came. Almost 6 months passed after that, and Jason was just waiting for his turn. "I wish I could live to see the fall," he muttered. "I want to remember this summer so much." He pressed his forehead against the glass, glanced at the clock. Hannah was supposed to be here now. Jason wasn't hungry, but he needed to take his pills, and they weren't supposed to be taken on an empty stomach. And sure enough, 2 minutes later there was a knock on the door. The landlord invited him in. "Jason, I brought you breakfast. It's 10, the girl smiled. "Good, Hannah." He took a seat at the table. "Thanks." He remembered the gratitude as the girl deftly began taking dishes from the tray. "It's nice outside." He sipped the water following the pills. "It's warm today, just right for spring. Can you feel it?" Joyful Hannah replied. "John said he'd be sawing the second cherry tree, but he asked me," the landlord replied. "If it's withered, what good is it? Maybe the weather will get better. Will you go outside then?" Maybe he sighed and started on his breakfast. Hannah went out. Jason preferred to spend his meal alone. Half an hour later, the maid came in, cleared the table, and he lay down. Here it is, the summation of 20 years of struggle. The feeling of superiority, the joy of being able to achieve something in life, he reasoned. You can't take anything to the other world. That truth is so simple, but for some reason no one thinks about it. Jason remembered himself at the age of almost 30, an energetic, young man who would stop at nothing to get his way. He was quickly noticed his tongue in cheek. Beautifully spoken words became Jason's calling card. But along with this, he had a big problem. The chief's wife fell in love with him. She was in her 40s, but she was still as fresh as ever. When Jason was young and thought that life existed to get something out of it, he started having an affair with Jessica. It was like the woman had lost her mind. She was willing to do anything for a guy, even leave her husband. For a year, their passions boiled like red-hot lava. Jason was sure he'd met his woman too. To be fair, Jessica had helped him. She had some good connections and had helped his wife start his small business. He quit his job, but with it went his passion. Or rather, the chief's wife had grown cold to him. Maybe she was feeling emotional because she felt threatened, or perhaps she wanted to punish her husband in this way. Nevertheless, Jason was at first very worried that his beloved had left him, and then he saw the possibilities. In return for his love for Jessica, he got a small electrical store and some money. That was enough to get him started. After about 4 months, Jason came to his senses and looked around. It seemed to him that he could move on. So he did. His store expanded. Within a couple years, he was already competing with the average retailers in his town. Of course, he made connections, paid whoever he needed to pay. In general, in 10 years, Jason was already a pretty solid man with a good profit. He didn't want to get married. It was enough for him that he was constantly changing his partners. He valued his freedom very much. Besides, his position required that his wife be a real lady, at least in appearance. That's why Jason didn't marry for the first time until he was 45. Then Amber seemed to him the best candidate. Despite her 22 years, she looked like a woman with dignity. That appealed to Jason a lot. He didn't mean to, he just liked women who could present themselves, show strength and their worth. He sighed. He felt like he was a completely different person back then. "John, I've already sawed the cherry tree," the man told him. Yes, the girl sighed in the same way. "John, I feel sorry for him." She hugged her husband. "Jason is a kind man." "That's true." He stroked the girl's head. "I'll be sorry to leave this place." A year and a half ago, a couple came to this town to earn money. By some miracle, they'd managed to get into Jason's house. His wife didn't want them, and she was too arrogant, but the owner insisted. He liked these young people. They seemed open and friendly. And the husband and wife turned out to be hard workers. "I don't want to leave here, either," Hannah said. "We're so lucky to have him. And I'm used to the house. I think Amber will kick us out when he dies," John said sadly. The mistress never hid her dislike of the servants, especially the girl. The young people did not know where she came from or where she was born. But rumor had it that Amber was also from the common people, a bit of a self-promoter for the role of the society lady she played all the time. She was beautiful. She was almost 40 and looked about 10 years younger. Why she and Jason didn't have kids, the couple didn't know. Nobody did. Someone just kept coming up with more and more theories. John left. Hannah started cleaning. They had a gardener working at the house. He usually started his season in mid-April and finished in the fall. Michael worked twice a week. Then there was the cook and his assistant and another cleaner. John and Hannah lived with Jason all the time. The rest of us had our own work schedules. The beginning of April was very warm indeed. Hannah put her face up to the sun. She was 23. Like anyone her age, she dreamed of having a house and children. That was the purpose of her and John coming here. Of course, they'd already saved some money. But it wasn't enough to buy a house in the city. Jason's house was in the suburbs. It was quiet. If the servants needed anything in town, the owner's driver drove them, or they took a cab. The old grandfather had long since retired, but he would come by his former master's request with his car and do his job professionally. Even at such an advanced age, Hannah didn't notice how quickly the time flew by. She stopped when the doorbell rang. The doctor must be here. She remembered what her host had told her, and ran to meet him. The doctor said hello. He and Jason exchanged a few words about the weather, and he headed to the second floor. Jason was already prepared. There was one thing that confused him. Amber never showed up to talk to the doctor. An hour later, the guest left the patient's home and went to his apartment without much emotion. "Yeah, nothing's changed," Jason said with frustration. Then there was no hope. He lay down, his mind reeling with thoughts. But what hurt him the most was his wife's neglect. He closed his eyes. A young Amber stood before him. Oh, how beautiful she was. They'd been introduced to each other at a rich man's birthday party. Amber was single. She was friends with the birthday girl's daughter. The girl chose her friends very carefully. You could say that Amber made up every move she made. She hadn't barely escaped the small town to go back there. Only a big city with prospects appealed to her. Amber relied on her looks. She always looked good. She was willing to spend the last of her money not on food, but on cosmetics or accessories. Of course, Amber constantly drew attention not only young people, but also middle-aged men, even those who were already in age. But she was waiting for her prince on a white horse. The three young men killed themselves, kneeling, swearing eternal love. But Emily remained quite indifferent to them. Two of them had good prospects in the future, but that was not enough for the girl. She wanted a ready-made option, so that the man of her dreams was fully provided for. He didn't have any problems, and she would agree to such a man. To such a man she was not sorry to give herself. So Amber waited. And that day she finally met him. After meeting him, her friend whispered in her ear who Jason was and what his condition was. To Amber, her words were like a balm to her soul. She was fine with it. She kept catching glances from her new acquaintance and playing along. She didn't want to miss the opportunity, especially since he wasn't married. After this meeting, the man invited Amber to an expensive restaurant. They got to know each other better. The girl deliberately did not want to immediately let the man near her. They dated for about 6 months. Then they started having an affair, and with such passion that Jason immediately asked her to marry him. How much I dreamed of her. Made plans. Dreamed of children, Jason said. But it didn't work out. In fact, everything he dreamed of back then never came true. 2 years later, Jason finally realized that his self-control hid a basic lack of decency. Amber was too cold for family life. She didn't want children, and she was always busy with herself. He was ashamed to admit to himself that he'd made the wrong choice. His wife wasn't the right person for him, but he couldn't break off the relationship. Jason was too proud at the time to admit his mistake. As time went on, Amber lost interest in her husband. They lived separate lives, nothing to connect them. A couple of times the husband tried to talk about children, but Amber immediately stated that she would not give birth. The reason for her decision she did not explain in any way. "I don't want her to get all my inheritance," he whispered. "She hasn't earned it. It's enough that she's lived as she wanted all these years. Never paid for anything. I'll write a will for some orphanage or hospital for the seriously ill like me." After the wife neglected her husband that day, he took great offense to it. Amber didn't work anywhere. She could easily reschedule her appointment at the beauty parlor, and there was no need for her at all. "She doesn't need me. Why lie to myself?" I was hoping that after she found out about my illness, at least something would change in her. But no, Jason thought. People like her have no sensitivity to others. They're like parasites, selling an imaginary benefit, but in reality, all they do is live at other people's expense. The man's anger began to break through. What is it about her that makes her act like that? Nothing. She's a stupid fool. You can't even talk to her about serious topics, simply because her brain is so underdeveloped that it only revolves around a couple areas in life. Emily is cunning, but now I see how primitive her cunning is. Meanwhile, Amber walked out of the beauty parlor. She was pleased with the treatments she had gotten. She thought her face looked better, and she looked good in general. She was the type of woman who had no passion for intimacy with men, nor did she enjoy romance. Amber was cold and calculating. No, she never cheated on her husband. For one reason only: she wasn't interested in sex. She didn't desire anyone. Maybe only once when she was young. Then Emily was madly in love with her classmate. For his sake, she was ready for anything, but he chose another. The girl decided that in her life there would be no more feelings. Behind the outer mystery, there was a dislike of men. And Emily did not like children. She would not go to the point of giving birth. She cared about her figure, and she didn't need a child. The whole meaning of her life was all about herself. The woman jumped into the car. She remembered that the doctor was coming to see her husband today. So what? Lately, she'd been wishing it was over. Amber was becoming the sole heir to Jason's fortune. And then she was planning a reorganization in the house. "I think he's already left." She glanced at her watch. She didn't feel like showing up home early. She pulled up in front of the large 2-story house. There was no doctor's car at the gate. Amber sighed contentedly. It was so hard for her to play interested in her husband. And then there were the constant doctor's visits. Hi, she walked over to Jason without enthusiasm. "How'd it go?" "Amber, I asked for you to be present." Her husband replied sharply. "You don't have to act like that. Your face is gray. Do you want to take out your anger over the doctor's words?" She calmly replied. "Jason, I am not to blame for your illness." His wife turned around and walked away. "You idiot," her husband shouted after her. "But that's it. I won't feel sorry for you anymore." Amber didn't hear his words. She didn't care what her husband wanted her to do. The last time she talked to the doctor, he'd given Jason 6 months. The woman didn't want to waste any energy on him. "You bitch. I'll baby you all." Jason couldn't calm down. His liver ached again. He gasped for breath. It seemed to him that Amber, the snake that had taken up residence in his organ, had eaten his entire liver from the inside out so that all he had to do was die. The disease quickly put everything in place. What Jason had kept from himself for so long became obvious. In the 2 years of his illness, Amber had confirmed all his hunches. What had he been counting on? Why did he think he'd be the one to melt this woman's heart? After all, throughout history, many men had tried to do it, but none had succeeded. "Beauty that kills," he scolded. Amber could be called an insidious killer. His wife didn't want to stay home for long. Besides, she knew her husband was nervous the day the doctor arrived. She changed her clothes and decided to hit the boutiques. The woman didn't waste time for lunch. She wanted to stop at her favorite restaurant. She got into the car, inserted the key. The car started to hume and then stalled. She did this several times. The Mercedes wouldn't start. "Shit," the landlady blurted out. She got out, opened the hood. She didn't know anything about cars. John was watching from the side. He finally took pity and came over to her. "Can I help you?" The guy smiled. Amber looked at him unhappily. John didn't wait for an answer. He looked under the hood, rolled up his sleeves, started picking at the Mercedes. "Amber, try it," he shouted. She sat down behind the wheel, and oh, miracle, the car started. John's eyes lit up. Amber never thanked him. The guy stayed standing, and she quickly drove out the gate. Building through himself, he reprimanded himself and went to wash his hands. He was a little offended. The mistress could have thanked him for his work, but it was beyond her dignity. Amber twisted the steering wheel nervously. Everything annoyed her. She wanted to throw out all those maids and make her own rules. After her husband's death, she'd planned to have a recruitment contest. Everyone had to be beautiful, have refined features, and a good figure. In general, her servants had to resemble Hollywood stars, not country simpletons. Amber stopped downtown in front of the mall. This was where the most expensive boutiques were located. The woman smiled in anticipation. She was a regular customer, and had already accustomed the salespeople to how she should be treated. Immediately, a beautiful young woman ran up and began to favor her. An hour later, the customer was satisfied. She picked up 2 large bags and tapped her heels to leave the boutique, and then her favorite restaurant was waiting for her, and so were the familiar waiters. A young man bustled in front of Amber and complimented her every now and then. The woman bathed in his attention. She liked such moments. The only thing she didn't like was when someone crossed the line and started talking about personal matters. The guests glanced around. The decently dressed gentlemen were looking at her intently. Amber smiled contentedly. There was still a charm about her that attracted the eyes of the opposite sex. It was from a man sitting at a neighboring table that Amber's waiter brought Amber a very expensive wine. "Thank you," she blushed. "Thank him for me, and please let him know I'm married." Apparently, the man regretted very much having spent so wantonly. He quickly paid and left the restaurant. Amber sipped the expensive wine with pleasure. It was really great. She really didn't want to go home. They rarely talked to her husband on the phone. Was Amber getting used to her single life as much as she could? Yes. Not only did she not suffer from it, she longed for it with all her soul. Amber drove into the yard. It was already dark. She glanced at her watch. The little hand was almost to 8. John was doing something in the yard. Amber, as usual, decided to walk by. "Ouch," the boy suddenly exclaimed and squeezed her hand. Amber stopped in hesitation. "What? Are your fingers frozen there?" she asked and walked over to John. He showed a bloody finger. "Okay, I'll get your wife now." "She's gone," the young man said faintly. "Would you mind bandaging my hand?" "And I," either with disdain or arrogance, replied the landlady. She slowly, the situation was not arousing any positive emotions in her. "Please, we need to treat the wound." "Please," the young man uttered. Amber and John walked to the kitchen. He showed them where the first aid kit lay. Amber's dress was too expensive to ruin. She bandaged the guy's arm from a distance. "Thank you," he thanked her, though the bandage the hostess made wouldn't last long. The woman left everything on the table and went to her room. She was tired of it all. "I wonder if she even has a soul," John uttered through the pain. "She's not even touched by human suffering." Half an hour later, the wife arrived. She rebandaged her husband's arm, stroked his head to quiet his pain. "I don't know how she decided to do that at all," Hannah said in amazement when she learned that Amber had done the bandaging. "Yeah, I asked her several times before she agreed," he sighed. "How does he even live with her? I mean, she's a heartless woman. I'm the one who's so lucky to have you." He kissed Hannah. "You're my gold." Hannah herself realized how lucky she was to have John. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. He carried her in his arms, literally. John was a great guy, and he was willing to work hard for his family. That night, the young people talked about their masters for a long time. They fell asleep after midnight. Amber did her evening ritual. She stopped by Jason's house and said goodnight. Her husband didn't say anything back. He was very angry with his wife. He thought Amber had crossed all the red lines. She was treating him like he was dead in front of him alive, showing her lack of care and interest in her husband too openly. Jason decided to call his lawyer the next day. He was going to divorce Amber. With those thoughts in mind, Jason fell asleep. He really wanted Amber to finally be punished. He realized that he had raised this snake himself and fed it all this time. But as the saying goes, "I bred you, I'll kill you." The next day, Jason was visited by his lawyer. Anthony was a young professional, but had bailed out the owner so many times that he didn't want to change him. "Good afternoon," Hannah opened the wicket. "It's been a long time since you've been to our place." "Oh, Hannah, I'm always busy," laughed the young man. "And how are you doing?" "How's John?" "We're all right," narrated the girl on the way to the house. "We're worried about Jason. Believe me, it's not a personal interest. We're very lucky to have him." "Yeah, Jason's a good man," Anthony agreed. "Well, see you around." Anthony waved as he walked up to the second floor. "Hi," cheered the landlord. Thanks for coming on short notice." He hugged his guest. Jason had often told the lawyer that if he had a son, he wanted him to look like Anthony. "Well, I'll drop all business for you," Anthony cheerfully replied. "I hope the doctors have reassured you." Unfortunately, no, Jason interrupted him. "I'm too serious to keep dreaming. I called you in to talk about my wife." The conversation was a long one. Half an hour later, Hannah brought them tea and dessert. Still, the men were still unable to come to any common ground. "You see, if you divorce her now, she'll take some of your property. And it doesn't matter that she never worked and lived off you. I suggest you write a will." Jason really wanted to get rid of his wife, maybe just to get back at her. He envisioned Amber leaving his house with nothing. But Anthony's arguments were too convincing. "Okay," he exhaled. "I don't know how I put up with her. I wanted so badly to die in peace and quiet." It wasn't easy for Jason either. He set himself to kick Amber out. "I need to think about the will," he said at the end of the conversation. "Anthony, I'll call you then." In his 32 years, Anthony hadn't often met such reasonable and honorable clients. Besides, Jason was dear to him in a human way. "Will you be long tonight?" Hannah went to see her guest off. "Is Jason doing well?" He smiled crookedly. "So Hannah, was good to see you." He held out his hand to the girl. Hannah sighed sadly. Anthony had always been kind to them, didn't discriminate because of education and connections, and they were simple people. Yes, Hannah didn't leave for the kitchen. The cook asked her to help him clean up. The helper's gone with the driver to the market. There she is. Look at her. The cook reprimanded angrily when they saw the landlady in the window. "No hello, no goodbye. How long have I worked here? I feel like I'm a mop, not a human being. Not once did she ever talk to me properly, but how to start a scandal if she's in a bad mood? That's the only thing she's always for." But lately, Amber hadn't touched anyone. She was waiting for her husband to die. "And then we'll all roll out of here," the man sighed. "I'm sure she won't leave any of us behind." Amber went outside to work. John, the gardener, hadn't gone to work yet, so she had to do his tasks. "Hey, you come here." Amber suddenly called out to him. John hesitantly walked over to the car. "I think I have something knocking. Can you listen to it? I don't want to drive to the shop today." "I can," the boy hesitated. "Only I've got to drive," he added unhesitatingly. The hostess moved into the passenger seat. John squatted behind the wheel. His hands nervously gripped the steering wheel. He pressed the pedal, and the car drove smoothly. Then John added gas, listening for a strange sound. The car jerked, and the driver barely swerved to the side. Amber collapsed on top of him. "We need to look." Pressed the brakes on the young man. "I wouldn't advise you to ride her. How am I supposed to drive it now?" Amber wondered. "Can you take me to the shop?" I protested something immediately. The guy inside might have misgivings, but he silenced his inner voice and smoothly drove the car toward the highway. Amber didn't speak to John the whole way. He pulled into the shop. The foreman immediately stated the cause of the breakdown and told him to leave the car. "Is that a cab fare for you?" Amber handed the guy the money. The amount was more than he needed. Their eyes met by chance. John. He barely spoke. "Thank you." The young man had never thought his mistress could behave like the fact that she had given him 10 times as much as he needed for the cab seemed to him first a coincidence and then a show of gratitude. "She has given you so much." Hannah could not believe her husband. "I can hardly believe it." "Hannah, who cares?" He hugged her. "We need to think about us," and he put his hands on her stomach and about our baby. "I'm so afraid to tell anyone that I'm pregnant yet," she said excitedly, "or the landlady will fire us early. I'm not worried about Jason." "But Amber, yeah, maybe she's not really as bad as we think she is." Her husband shrugged. God knows what's on her mind. The incident with the car had somehow gotten Amber closer to John. At least he was no longer afraid of her. 2 days passed. The landlady showed up in the yard with her car. John was hobbling nearby. For the first time in all this time, the landlady called his name. "Come here." The young man dropped the rake and headed toward her, going over in his head the options of why she was calling him over. "Look at this," Amber smiled. "I'm going to ask you to put your hand over hers." "All right," he stammered and got in the driver's seat. A moment later, the engine hummed. John listened intently. Everything seemed fine to him. He drove back and forth across the yard for a couple of meters. Amber sat next to him. "But what?" Questioningly, she looked at the guy. You think everything's okay?" John nodded. The woman quickly pulled a wallet out of her purse and slipped him $5,000. "You don't have to," he denied. "It's not like I did anything." But Amber put a finger to her lips to silence him. Smiling contentedly, she got out of the car. John stared after her. He couldn't understand what was going on with his mistress. No one knew about it except Amber. By some coincidence, she suddenly looked at her employee and saw that he looked a lot like her classmate Peter, her first love. It was then that her car broke down. What moved Amber then? Lost feelings of happiness, curiosity, or desire to experience a long-forgotten feeling again. But the woman felt strangely drawn to this young man. She couldn't lie to herself. That day, it was as if some valve had opened in her that had been blocking her breath all these years. She just wanted to fly. Amber, overjoyed, went back to her room, her heart singing. She opened her closet, looked in the huge mirrors. She was pleased with the way she looked. Pretty girl. She winked to herself. Why? Do I have the right to have fun for once in my life? She laughed loudly. The woman's eyes burned like a cat's eye, a devilish fire burned in them. Amber took off her hairpins, unraveling her gorgeous hair. Why waste such beauty? After practicing her seductive face a couple times, she reached into her closet and began trying on her many outfits. She had a goal now, and she was going to do whatever it took to fulfill it. No one and nothing could stand in her way. Amber had wanted a man's love for years, craved it passionately. Her blood was boiling in her veins, and she was ready to get John by any means necessary. Unfortunately, the latter had no idea that he was now a red rag for his mistress. Perhaps if the young man had been more experienced with women, he never would have fallen into this trap. It was almost 10-0 when Amber looked out the window. It was the third time. John looked around. There was still no one in the yard. But where is she? He thought angrily, when she doesn't have to hang around there forever. His thoughts were cut short because Amber appeared. John grabbed his bag lightning fast and ran downstairs. Amber was carrying some old boards. "Can I see you?" She waved her hand at him, and he came right over. Not really. He didn't like that. This was the second time the landlady had given his wife money. And John was glad of it. It seemed he deserved a little extra on his paycheck. "Good morning." The young man smiled broadly. "Do you want me to take a look at your car?" "No, I want you to come with me." "No," she said in a beautiful voice. "I need your help." The woman added more softly. "Okay, I'll just warn my wife." John answered her and ran to Hannah. She gave him a stern look. She really didn't like the whole thing. But if I say no, God forbid, she'll fire us. What would we do then? Her husband looked her in the eye. "All right," she said through her tears. "Please don't show your face to her again. I don't like all this very much." John raced back with an arrow. Amber was already on her way, waiting for him on the street. She'd only thrown her passenger a few words. He didn't seem particularly eager to talk to her. She threw him a questioning look. "You want to know where we're going?" "To the store?" She laughed. "I need a loader today." "Okay," John said timidly. "What do you need to haul?" "Furniture." He encouraged the conversation. "No, my new clothes." The landlady kept her eyes on him. The boy froze in his seat. He didn't know how to react. Maybe it was a joke. Nevertheless, he agreed and fell silent. The car stopped outside a shopping center. Amber started rummaging through her purse, pulled out an expensive cell phone, and ostentatiously got out of the car. As she did so, her body bent so that John had a chance to see all of her rounded form. The guy blushed. "Let's go," Amber smiled. "I definitely can't do this tonight without you." She winked enigmatically at the young man. John felt out of place. They walked into an expensive store. Amber showed him a seat. He took a seat. Then the hostess began to pick out clothes, accompanied by a counselor. "What do you think?" John heard a voice as if from far away. He was completely immersed in his thoughts. Standing before him was Amber in a gorgeous dress. She had let her hair down to complete the picture. Her shoulders were bare. "Good," bewildered the young man. "I'm sorry," I blushed. "I'm not good at this," he said. "You just tell me, do you like it or not?" Amber demanded. John nodded. "I'll take it right away," she told the salesman. About 10 minutes later, she showed up in her new outfit. John wanted to get up and leave, but the hostess grabbed his arm just in time. "Stop," she commanded. "It's a job, so sit and watch. I'll pay you for it. Cash motivation." There was a little less of the pragmatic John's fervor. The hostess's second outfit didn't appeal to him. Screw it. She laughed and handed the salesman the clothes. We'll take the next one. So in almost 3 hours, John had chosen only 3 outfits for his mistress. And you have good taste. She complimented her assistant when they had already gotten into the car. Well, John, such a thing. We should celebrate. Before he could object, Amber steered the car toward her favorite restaurant. To good taste, she raised her glass. John sat looking around. Richly dressed people were eating everywhere. He sat in his work clothes and looked rather silly in his eyes. Don't worry so much, Amber took his hand. I'm my own man here, so no one will say anything about you. I'm sorry, but I have to get back. I have a lot of work to do. Tried to walk away, John tried to leave. He was ready to go home and at his own expense. Eat first and then I'll call you a cab, Amber said seriously. In this, she didn't fool him. The guy was already getting in when she touched his arm. Thank you, she pressed her fingers lightly against his palm. It was really nice spending time with you. John quickly slid into the cab, his hand burning with fire. The young man sensed the danger that came from his mistress. All he wanted to do then was run away from her, but John was constantly haunted by her scent. What does she want from me? He thought as he sat in the cab. I'm not her errand boy. I work in her house. But I'm not a slave. Besides, I have a family. John gave Hannah the money she had paid him today. Mistress so much, she repeated in confusion. John, what have you been doing? The wife became even more agitated. Were you carrying her bags? He answered unhappily. Can I come to my senses? Her store makes me dizzy. John decided that the next time the landlady approached him, he would refuse her at once. Let her do what she wanted with him, even kick him out. Amber returned home and walked over to her husband. He said hello through gritted teeth and pretended he didn't want to see her. Okay, have a good night, she smiled. I hope this night will be your last. And she thought to herself. Emily was lying in her bed and John was standing in front of her. She was frantic to see him. She needed him. What can I think of tomorrow? She thought. Gotta show myself in all my glory. All my life I've dreamed of this boy. She wasn't embarrassed by the age difference or the fact that John was married and his wife worked in her house. It was like she'd lost her mind. She needed him now. I want him, she whispered and smiled sweetly. After that idiot dies, I'm going to live here with him. I'll kick everyone to hell. I'll hire a decent maid, and he'll stay with me. Sometimes the woman dreamed of Hannah. She was up most of the night. She was having mood swings and insomnia because of her pregnancy. She went out into the yard. It was cold, tangled in her jacket, sat down on a bench in the garden. I'll talk to her, Hannah decided. There's no point in dragging my husband back and forth. I may be thrown out, but I won't let her play with my John. The next few days were very hectic and the lawyer came again. He and Hannah talked a little. The girl didn't know that time the landlord had written a will for all his property to a foundation that dealt with seriously ill children. Hannah fiddled with the master that day. He looked pleased. In fact, Jason was very happy that he would punish his negligent wife in this way. He had no idea at the time how drastically things would change. Jason asked her to stay with him for a while. Meanwhile, Amber approached John again. He looked at her unhappily. I don't feel well, she whispered. Could you take me to the hospital, please? Yes, of course. The young man jumped up to her and took her hand. He got behind the wheel, and the car started slowly toward the hospital. John kept glancing at his passenger the whole way. Amber did look pale. Are you okay? He asked her. She nodded. I'm okay. Shouldn't we call an ambulance? No, Amber waved her hand. I'll be fine. She was flattered that John cared so much about her. The guy helped the woman up to the doctor's office. He nervously paced the hallway when she came out. He immediately asked how she was. The landlady reported that she was better. She actually got a blush on her cheeks. I'm craving ice cream. And to go for a walk, she suddenly asked. The guy parked outside a small cafe. Amber was almost healthy by now, ordered an ice cream for herself and for him too. She ate with great relish and told him something. John looked at her in bewilderment. His hostess looked like a little girl and laughed all the time. And she is pretty. A thought flashed through his mind. If I had met her before, I would certainly have paid attention to her. It was as if she had read his thoughts. We are all different when we are young, she sighed. I would like to feel carefree and free again. What gave you that feeling then? John asked her. He was interested in talking to the new Amber. You wouldn't believe it, she laughed. We went out on the town a couple times a year, and the first place my parents made sure to take me was the carousel. Yes, he laughed, but it's very easy to organize. There's a nice park here and you can ride the merry-go-rounds. Then let's go. Amber jumped up and grabbed his arm. Before John knew it, they were on their way to Central Park. Amber was driving. She was thinking about something the whole way. John looked at her and couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. Her cell phone rang. I'd be right there. It's a little chilly, he said. Come on, I'm here on business. Are you with her again? Hannah shouted into the phone. But John had already hung up. The guy didn't want to lie to himself. He was enjoying the company of his landlady. They rode 3 different kinds of merry-go-rounds until Amber got dizzy. All right, that's enough, she said in a commanding voice. Let's go home. She got behind the wheel and they headed toward the suburbs. But halfway there, the woman pulled over and began kissing John passionately. To his horror, he didn't resist. I love you. She pulled away from his lips. My boy, I promise you will be happy with me. John was silent. He refused and asked for a ride home. Amber realized that she needed to take things step by step. She stopped at the beginning of the street and drove off again. She was insanely happy. She really wanted to get to the most important part, but it was necessary to make John fall in love with her enough that there was no turning back. She was too careful to mess it up. John went to bed, but he didn't give his wife all the money his landlady had paid him today. He put most of it away in his stash. Hannah fell asleep, and he couldn't sleep a wink. Amber's happy face was in front of him. The guy felt like he'd never experienced anything like it before. With Hannah, they were more like friends. Their family life was based on very simple principles. But Amber was overwhelming him with new emotions. He wanted to run somewhere. Perhaps the word inspiration could describe his state of mind. The next day, John woke up and felt goosebumps running down his back. He was insanely anxious to see his mistress. He deliberately did something in the yard, and Amber still wouldn't come out. She was watching him from the window, and she liked the fact that he was always looking around. Satisfied, Amber walked over to her husband. She was in a good mood. Jason, does my approaching death cheer you up so much? Amber said, instead of greeting her husband. Jason, I want to take care of you. Do you? Amber played. She stood for a moment and left his room. Maybe she was up to something, he wondered. I know her too well. I'd seen her like this the last time I'd asked her to marry me. Jason was 65 years old, and he had a good grasp of human psychology. She must have found a man, he concluded. But, he smiled, don't even think you're getting anything. Amber went back to her room and changed. Tonight she was going to shine. She felt the climax was near. Good morning. John came running up to her. If you need any help, just let me know. Yes, after lunch, she said casually. John, I need you to come with me to a place. He touched his lips and tasted again the kiss that had been left on his lips from yesterday. Amber had just wandered around the stores and had breakfast at a cafe. She was already itching to meet John, but she waited. Yes, the best room ever, she confirmed. E40 p.m. please, 2 o'clock. Stopping by the house, she picked up her boyfriend and asked him to load some things into her car. Hannah stood watching her husband run around the yard. Husband, I'm going to have a good coven tonight. The girl headed toward the landlady. Amber is going to get me now. You and all these things are in the workshop. There are people to pick them up because she's going somewhere. I don't know, he lied. Hannah stopped, kissed her husband on the cheek, and headed into the house. And John, satisfied, sat down in the front seat. They were pulling away from the house when Amber threw the steering wheel and passionately pounced on him. This time, the guy was actively participating as well. Half an hour later, they were already at the hotel. Amber didn't care what anyone thought of her. She and her guest went up to the room. There was already champagne and fruit on the table. To a good evening, she raised her glass. I hope we have a nice time. John's whole past life just faded away. It seemed to him he simply hadn't lived before. The contrast was so huge that the guy dissolved simply in his passion. Such a storm of emotions he had never experienced before. Amber stroked his head and said affectionate words. John lay there with his eyes closed. Why did you choose me? he suddenly asked. Especially since I'm married. He turned to her. Because you're different, laughed the hostess. And also because I love you. I think we're made for each other. What about Hannah? He suddenly remembered his wife and blushed. What's going to happen to her now? She'll be all right too. She'll meet her happiness. It's just that we won't say anything to anyone yet. As soon as my husband dies, she fell silent. But John understood what she was trying to say. At that moment, he was so lost in unreality that he couldn't even guess who he was or where he was. He was so caught up in his passion that he couldn't see his life without Amber anymore. Hannah seemed to sense something wrong right away. First of all, she didn't like the smell of champagne. John very rarely drank, mostly wine at the holiday table. John, what's wrong? His wife asked in excitement. Have you been drinking? She kept her eyes on him. That's enough, he pronounced. Can you imagine my luck today? One was introducing himself about his wedding. The guys poured me a glass, too. All right, Hannah said with resentment in her voice. John, I'm scared. I think something is going to happen. She pressed herself against her husband. Yeah, it's going to be okay, he kissed her, but only Amber was present in his mind. What John wanted then? It's hard to say. He was generally living in some sort of fantasy world at the time. He thought of nothing but his mistress. The main thing was that she promised him that everything would be fine, and how he was not interested. The guy also did not think that even if the master died, Hannah had to leave this house if he stayed. Where would she go with a child? I'll give her all the money, he decided to himself. Maybe Amber will add some of it too, so Hannah can buy her own house. That was the end of John's thoughts and plans for his life. As long as Amber was with him, the rest didn't matter to him. 2 weeks passed. Hannah felt coldness from her husband. From the experience, she was put on conservatorship. That's when everyone, including the master and mistress, found out she was pregnant. I don't care. Amber tried to keep her cool. In reality, she was really angry. You're still going to stay with me, aren't you? She covered her face with her hands and cried. What's wrong with you? John put his arms around her. I only love you. Do you want me to tell Hannah all about us? No, she answered at once. Let my husband die first, and then I'll tell her everything myself. A little over 3 months passed. Jason decided to walk to his room where he used to conduct his business. It could have been called a study. Its windows faced the high neighbor's wall. There was almost nothing to see there at all, except a couple of trees under the window. The man spotted 2 people, took a closer look, and almost shrieked. Amber and John were standing against the wall where no one could see them and were kissing passionately. Oh, shit, Jason scolded. She's completely out of her mind. You crazy fool. Hannah's going to have a baby soon. At first, the owner wanted to call his wife in and make a scene, but then it would have been revealed that he'd robbed her of everything, and she'd have nothing when he died. Amber could instantly file for divorce and take a decent chunk of his estate. What am I going to do? He pondered. God, what a pity, Hannah. Poor girl. That's right, it dawned on him. Jason called Anthony at once. He arrived a couple hours later. Wow. The man was surprised to see Hannah's belly. I didn't know you were having a baby. Congratulations. Thank you. The girl stroked her belly. Anthony, it's been so long since you've been here. We miss you already, she said. I promise I won't be missing you again, he laughed. The girl led her guest to the host. He asked for tea to be brought to them, and Hannah set the table and left. Anthony, I'm asking for your help in a very delicate matter. The client's voice trembled. The lawyer looked at him intently. He had no idea what Jason was about to say. I want to sign my house over to Hannah, he said abruptly. We can do that. We need to get Ashley and her husband involved, Anthony clarified. He began to think of different options in his mind. Though on her specifically, the host replied dryly. You see, it was painful for him to talk about it. Anthony, my wife is having an affair with John, he admitted. I don't care. I've got one foot in the grave. Hannah, on the other hand, has had some bad luck. How so? The guest opened his mouth in amazement. She's pregnant. I saw her today. That's the problem. She doesn't seem to know anything, he sighed. Anthony, I want to help this girl. Besides, I feel kind of guilty about her in a way. But you didn't put your wife up to her husband, did you? The man threw angrily. Wonder if he fell for her in the hope of getting your property. The lawyer felt like cursing. but he had long ago been able to keep his temper in check in such situations. "Bastard," he whispered as he walked to the window. "What's going to happen to her now?" The man was quiet for a moment. He liked Hannah. She was like a pure tear. Oh, and John seemed like a decent guy too. But right now he was ready to punch him in the face. "Okay," he approached Jason again. "Bring all the paperwork over tomorrow for her to sign. I want to leave her some of the money," the man added. "She'll have to raise the child alone." Anthony came downstairs. He was all pale. Hannah came up to him at once and smiled cheerfully. "What's the matter with you?" The girl said involuntarily, "Is Jason doing so badly?" "No," he suddenly took Hannah's hand. "It's going to be okay." He ran his other hand through her hair. "We'll see each other again soon." Anthony was acting strange somehow. He didn't usually take such liberties, though the girl sensed his behavior as a friendly gesture. It seemed to her that he knew something that she certainly wouldn't like. While John was saved by the fact that his wife was pregnant, she wouldn't let him near her. She got into moods easily, so he tried to keep his hands off her. "No, have you seen her today?" The wife said suddenly. "Dressed up like a doll. Walked past Lauren and me, flashed a grudging smile, left." "Who?" "Emily." John blushed and corrected himself. "Amber." Anna somehow didn't notice it. "Yeah, well, playing the hell out of it." The wife replied grudgingly. "She's not worth a damn herself, is she?" "I don't know." John wanted to avoid the conversation. "John, Hannah, screw her." He waved his hand. "Let's go to bed." 2 or 3 times a week, John went out for a couple hours on a coven. His master would let him. Hannah didn't know her husband went to Amber's hotel. He always brought back good money he supposedly made when he returned home, so up until that point, Hannah hadn't questioned any of it. But 2 weeks after Jason wrote the will for the house, the thing Hannah had been dreading happened on her. John went into town for work. Hannah got a call from the health clinic telling her to come right away. There was some kind of test missing. Either the girl had forgotten about it last time, or she hadn't been scheduled for it. She managed to get out of the office in time and headed for the exit. Realized she couldn't take public transportation. "I'll stop by the market," she thought, "and then I'll call a cab." The bazaar was 50 meters away from the polyclinic. It was hot. It was approaching September. The girl stopped in the shade of a large store, sitting on a bench when she heard joyful voices. Hannah thought the man's voice sounded familiar. She turned around. There was a familiar car in the back row, and beside it, oh my God, she almost fainted when she saw her John kissing Amber and quickly jumping into the car. Hannah's trembling hands tried to press her husband's number, but he didn't answer. The girl began to pant from the stress. Her stomach felt like it was squeezing. "Calm down." She ordered herself and breathed deeply. "It's all right. I was just imagining it. She needed to get home and she would be safe there." She lay down on the bed and cried bitterly. That's how John found her. Rushed to his wife at once. She could not say anything to him for a long time. "I saw you," Hannah said at last. "Did you kiss her, John?" "That's why." She turned her face in. All the more for her, the husband was silent. He couldn't look his wife in the eye. "I love her," he finally said, breaking Hannah's heart in half. "I can't live without her." "Oh my God." The girl covered her face with her hands and cried even more. "What about me?" John didn't answer her. He ran out of their room. The girl got out of bed and, as lost, went up to the second floor. She beat her fist with all her might at Amber's. "You bitch," she screamed at the whole house. "You stole my husband. Get out." A moment later, the door opened and Amber appeared in the hallway. At first, the grin stayed on her face, but then the woman became seriously frightened. Hannah clawed at her hair, and they began to fight. Amber had one big advantage: she wasn't pregnant. Jason came out screaming. He realized what was going on. The whole house was buzzing. Before he could get to Hannah, she shoved Amber as hard as she could, sending her flying down the stairs. John showed up in the doorway as well, helping his mistress up. Hannah walked up the steps. Jason was in great pain from the excitement and could barely make it down to the first floor. No, Hannah blocked the car. Her husband wanted to leave with Amber in. John quickly ran out, pulled her aside, and the car drove out the gate and into the street. "No," Hannah sobbed. "John?" And everything went black in her eyes and she blacked out. When Hannah came to, she realized she was in the hospital. She started to feel her stomach in terror. The baby was still there, and she sighed. Half an hour later, a nurse came to her, and in the evening Anthony appeared in the room. He tried to speak as calmly as possible. Jason couldn't make it, and he wasn't feeling well either. The girl turned her back to the wall, crying. The pain was unbearable. The lawyer waited a few minutes. "Hannah, I have some very important and bad news to tell you," he finally said in a trembling voice. Hannah turned to him abruptly. There were tears in her eyes. Anthony waved his hand. He wanted John to answer for everything, but not at this price. "Was Jason dying?" Hannah asked. "No, it's not about him," Anthony answered, and then he was silent again. It was too hard. "Did John and Amber crash?" Hannah persisted. "No," she shouted across the room. A man ran up, pulling her against him. Someone brought cold water. "Did he make it?" After a few minutes, she asked. Anthony shook his head negatively. Hannah became really hysterical. She was given an injection and fell into a dream. "God, it hurt so bad," Anthony whispered, stroked her hand. Before leaving the room, Jason lay on his bed and cried. He really hated to end his life like this. Of course, he dreamed of getting rid of Amber, especially after she seduced Hannah's husband. But that she'd done it, he had no doubt. As the investigator had told him, John had been driving, stressed out of control. They went full speed into the ditch. The car was thrown high into the air, flipped several times. Both of them died on the spot. Jason felt he didn't have long to live. His nerves were on edge. The events of the last few days had taken the last of his strength. He wanted to go to Hannah, but he couldn't even get out of bed. He realized that he still had to get through the funeral. He would naturally not be able to go to the cemetery. In fact, all these matters were now handled by Anthony. He contacted Gregory's parents. He had to tell them everything. His father and mother took him in themselves. They didn't want to make a big deal out of it. No one came for Amber. So Anthony had to organize everything himself. Daniel was admitted for observation. Of course, she was in her 8th month, and there was still a chance that if she didn't make it and gave birth, the baby's life could be fought for. But the doctors did everything they could to make sure she carried the baby to at least 8 months. The tone was very strong. Somehow, Jason made it to the day of the funeral. In the evening, he was taken to a hospice for the critically ill. Anthony was torn deciding his affairs. He drove to the hospital to see Hannah. She was also visited by the boys. The cook kept sending her normal food by courier. All in all, everyone sympathized with the girl. "Congratulations." Anthony held out a huge bouquet to Hannah and blushed. He had come to pick her up from the maternity hospital himself. Hannah didn't realize the change that had taken place. After his wife died, Jason had written a deed of gift for the share. She was now sole owner of the house. Everyone already knew about it except her. "It's such a shame we don't have Jason with us," the girl said sadly. "He did so much for me." "Hannah, believe me, he did a lot more for you than you realize," replied the lawyer enigmatically. "I'm very glad you've come to your senses." In passing, he threw in, "Anthony, thank you too." She touched his shoulder. "You've turned out to be a true friend." The lawyer lowered his eyes. He had liked Hannah for a long time. He certainly didn't want to take advantage of her today. The car pulled into the yard, and there were already guys standing outside. Hannah gave her son to Anthony and began to hug everyone. The man was afraid of the baby at first, but then began to stroke him lovingly. "Wow, Anthony, you look just like his daddy," the cook joked. "He let me take a picture of you." Everyone went into the house where a large table was set up. Hannah put her son in the stroller. He was sleeping soundly. Anthony asked her to talk to him alone. Everyone knew what he was about to say to her. "Hannah," the man looked her in the eyes. "This house belongs to you now. Jason has deeded it to you, holding out all the necessary paperwork," you said. "I don't want it that way." "May," Hannah immediately protested. "Anthony, let him come back. I'll make sure he spends his last days in joy. I don't want anything from him," sobbed the girl. "He'll be here in about half an hour for the papers." He cast a glance at Hannah's cell phone and paced nervously around the yard. Finally, someone honked, and the gate opened. A special car that transported the sick drove in. Jason was sitting in a wheelchair. Hannah immediately rushed to him and fell to her knees in front of him, kissing his hands. "Please stay," she begged him. "We need you. I need you, my son." Hannah sobbed. Jason couldn't help himself. He wiped his eyes now and then. "Are you like a father to me?" She hugged the man. "I will take care of you until your last breath. Please make me happy. All of us." All of his servants crowded around the former master. They all looked at him with eyes full of pleading. The decision he had to make was a very difficult one. The man had already let things go and wanted to leave quickly, but Hannah gave him hope, albeit briefly, but still happiness. Jason's attending physician had agreed on one condition only. He now had round-the-clock care from 4 nurses who rotated constantly. Hannah would bring the baby to Jason and place him in her arms. He was overjoyed. In fact, it was Hannah and her son who prolonged his life back then. Yes, it was only 4 months, but it was a kind of happiness Jason had never felt in his entire life. With Amber gone from the house, it was as if the tension was gone as well. The housemates were having fun at work, and all of the staff visited Jason every day. They talked to him, sometimes having tea together when he was able. Hannah really kept her eyes on her beloved Jason. Despite being a small child, she fussed around him all the time. Very often, perhaps 3 times a week, John also came to visit him. It was as if he, too, had become a full member of their extended family. "So," Jason said, "John, I don't have much time left. I want to leave everything to Hannah. Let her decide what she wants to do with all my money." "Hannah is a bright person," John replied at once. She doesn't want your money. She's taken over your house." "I mean, John, she's like a daughter to me." He wept. "I really want her to have a reliable man in her life." The lawyer blushed and lowered his head. Jason almost jumped out of bed. John, he couldn't believe his hunch. The man kept his eyes on him. "Yes, I've been in love with Hannah for a long time," he admitted honestly. "Only she doesn't know anything about it." That night, they had a serious man-to-man conversation. Jason was sure of John, so he would have married her to him immediately if she'd agreed. It was late when Jason called Hannah back to his place. He had decided to have this conversation, after all. "Hannah, daughter, look at me closely," he said to her. "There's something I'd like to ask you. It's about John." Hannah was confused. Her heart was pounding frantically in her chest. She was afraid to even think about what Jason would say to her now. "You're a grown woman, and I don't want to tell you what to do," he sighed. "But if someone asked me what kind of husband I'd want for you as a father, I'd choose John. Hannah, he loves you. And he loves your son, too. For nothing. Not because you're the heir to a great fortune. I think I love him, too." She lowered her eyes. "John is a good friend. He's reliable." "That's good," Jason cheered. "Daughter, listen to me. You're going to be happy with him. I can feel it. It's a well-known fact that people in my condition are very intuitive." The wedding wasn't lavish, but it was attended by everyone close to me. The bride and groom's parents came. Everyone was happy. Early the next day, Hannah walked into Jason's room, and the nurse was asleep. She immediately realized that something had happened. His body was cold. Hannah at first wanted to scream out in pain, but she glanced at her former master's face. He was smiling like an angel. That's how happy he was buried. The waitress froze upon finding the little girl's note. There wasn't a second to wait. It all started with the note. Linda sat in the staff room on a plastic stool with her back against the cold wall. In her hand, she held a scrap of white tissue. She didn't need to read the lines again, hastily scrawled in childish handwriting. Linda had memorized the short, poignant text by heart. "My name is Cassandra. Please help me. I'm in danger." The many exclamation points made the message literally scream. It was a scream, a cry for help. Linda, of course, immediately realized who had left the note. The same girl. It was impossible not to notice her. Slim, pale, very pretty. Long hair the color of melted chocolate, gathered in a low ponytail. Big brown eyes. A sweet girl of 12, but not quite ordinary, of course. It was not without reason that Linda had noticed her as soon as she entered the cafe, accompanied by her parents. The girl, now Linda knew that her name was Cassandra, was brought to the cafe late enough, almost at closing time. There were few customers. Cassandra was accompanied by 2 adults, her mother and father, who were obviously very wealthy people. Linda realized that at once. And it wasn't even about their appearance. Today, everyone dressed stylishly and beautifully. You can't tell much from their clothes. The man's gaze was imperious and a little arrogant. He obviously felt himself the master of life, and his wife's gaze showed contempt for others. An unpleasant couple. No, not all wealthy people, of course, seemed so disgusting to Linda. But these. They belonged to a special class of customers, rich, cold, and always dissatisfied with the service or the quality of food. Linda had been working in this cafe as a waitress for almost 7 years. During this time, she had learned to be a very good judge of people. You learn it here, when your salary depends on it. Any mistake, a cranky customer will file a complaint against the waitress, and then this month's bonus will not be seen. And Linda didn't live large anyway. Every penny counted. Behind the important couple walked the quiet girl, Cassandra. It seemed strange at once. Usually children and parents walk together. Or they let the children go first, because this was a family cafe. Linda had seen many families, but here her daughter stepped behind her parents silently, indifferently, like a shadow. The family was seated at a table in the center of the room. Linda walked over to offer the menu to the guests. The father nodded without giving the waitress a glance. Linda stepped back. No need to stand over people's heads. When they were ready to order, they'd call for it. The waitress had a lot to do. Closing soon, she needed to wipe down the bar and arrange the dishes neatly on the shelves. And from a distance, she watched the customers. Linda noticed at once that the girl was dressed a little too strangely. It's July, and the heat is so hot that the air conditioners can't cope with the load. It gets a little fresher in the evening, but it's still stuffy outside. And the girl is dressed like autumn, long dark trousers, trainers, long-sleeved t-shirt. Maybe that's the fashion of teenagers nowadays. No, it didn't look like that. Linda had seen a lot of kids. On the contrary, in summer, girls of that age tend to emphasize their youth and beauty with more open and tight-fitting outfits. There are, of course, representatives of different subcultures. Linda didn't know much about it, who were the goths and who else. But this girl didn't look like them either. Non-formals usually decorated themselves with bracelets and other accessories with symbols, dyed their hair in bright colors, applied eye-catching makeup. Linda was fine with it. Youth went else to experiment with appearance. This girl, Cassandra, looked more like a recluse. Closed black clothes, no makeup, her eyes mostly downcast. A disturbing sight, unfamiliar. There was no energy in this child, no cheerfulness, no curiosity. Linda thought at the time maybe the girl was sick. She had seen such children with special developmental needs. The man ordered coffee for himself and his wife, a milkshake for his daughter, and pancakes with fruit fillings. The family hurriedly ate dinner. Linda was minding her own business, but she kept glancing at the visitors, especially the girl. Cassandra ate the delicious pancakes without enthusiasm. It seemed that she did not do it for pleasure, but simply because it was necessary. Not a single emotion on her pale, pretty face. The parents talked to each other, even smiled, but neither of them ever addressed their daughter, as if she didn't exist. Linda mentally sympathized with the child. She herself had the same indifferent and cold father, who did not notice his only daughter and was not interested in her affairs. But her mother successfully replaced both parents. She would listen to her, take pity, and support her when necessary. Mom worked hard, but always felt when her daughter needed help. Linda, in her 40s, still could not fully come to terms with the fact that Mom is no longer there. Her father is alive, but he lives in another city and has a new family. He had never paid attention to his daughter before, and now it was as if they were neither relatives. Linda did not regret it, probably because from the very beginning she and her father had not developed a warm and close relationship. She was used to it. In this family that visited the cafe before closing time, both parents behaved coldly and aloofly with their daughter. It was as if the child didn't exist. During the entire dinner, the father had only paid attention to Cassandra once, when she had accidentally elbowed his coffee cup. A few drops of the drink spilled out onto the table. The girl immediately shrank back, clearly expecting punishment. Linda could clearly see it in the movement of her thin, sharp shoulders. The father said something sharply and offensively to his daughter, and gave her a look as if she were not a child but a disgusting but not dangerous insect. The mother shook her head contritely, saying, "There you go, you've ruined everything again, you clumsy girl." Unpleasant parents. What else can I say? But mothers and fathers do not choose what they got. They can be worse to live with. Orphanages are full of kids, and there's a lot of street kids on the streets. And there are also dysfunctional families, in which the little ones also have a hard life. But it's a girl. At least she does not starve and does not walk in worn-out clothes. The family slowly left the cafe in the same order they had entered, Nicholas and Jen in front, Cassandra behind them like a pale shadow. Linda closed the door behind them. The establishment's working day had come to an end. This is a family cafe, not a late-night bar. Linda stretched and exhaled in relief. Finally, this long, hard day was over. There had been a lot of visitors today. The woman was tired. All that was left was to tidy up, sweep up, pick up the rubbish from the floor, and she could go home. And there is a cozy sofa in front of the TV, a fluffy plaid and her favorite cats, Red Punky and White Zephyr. By the age of 40, Linda had not found her family and was not worried about it at all. Now she wasn't, but now she was humbled by the pain. But once the news that she would never become a mother turned her whole world upside down. She loved children, adored babies since childhood, often saw herself in her dreams as a mother of many children. Even the names of future sons and daughters long ago chose. But the woman managed to pull herself together and find other joys in life. Only here she still loved children very much. That's why she got a job in a family cafe. Small visitors, it seems, felt the favor of the smiling waitress and frankly reached out to her. She was the favorite employee of the cafe with the young guests of the institution. She would joke, she would calm them down. And like Cassandra, she would motivate them to eat a dish that was not too tasty but healthy. The happy parents often wrote compliments to Linda in the book, and she was pleased. Linda had already wiped down all the tables except the one where the last customers were sitting. It was his turn. That's when the woman noticed the note. It was scribbled in red pencil on a scrap of napkin. In the children's cafe, each table had a cup of colored pencils for boys and girls who liked to draw. There was also paper lying here, but they were large sheets, so the girl chose a napkin. The napkin was small, inconspicuous, and fit easily under the spice rack. Linda read Cassandra's poignant text. The girl wasn't sick at all. She was in danger. She needed help. It was not for nothing that the little girl immediately struck the woman as unusual. And now Linda was sitting in the small house, holding a piece of napkin in her hands, and desperately thinking about what to do next. The only solution that came to mind was to go to the police. But it was a little scary. Something told her that it was unlikely that her application would be taken seriously. And the woman had not learned to shout and scandalize, getting her own way, although she should have learned to do so by the time she was 40 years old. Linda was worried about something else if the police did not believe her. What to do next? She couldn't leave her child in danger. Linda realized that she couldn't just move on with her life if she didn't help Cassandra. She would constantly think about the girl's faded gaze, her panic and skinny figure. How do you live knowing that somewhere a child is suffering who has come to you for help? Linda quickly finished her business at the cafe and hailed a taxi. In her handbag was that very note. She would show it to the police right away. They have to look into it. They just have to. But as Linda had hoped, the station didn't take her words seriously. "She's just attracting attention," grinned the investigator with tired eyes. "I have a daughter the same age, and she's always making up things to get attention. Books, soap operas all mess with her head." "You don't understand," Linda objected. That girl didn't look like she was joking. She had those scared eyes. "Well, she's a good actress." The uniformed man was clearly anxious to get rid of the annoying visitor. He probably had enough work to do without her. "Still, take a statement. Check the family." "On what grounds?" asked the investigator. "Did you personally see any of the parents hitting the child or insulting him at least?" Linda shook her head negatively. She already realized that she was unlikely to get anything out of this policeman. He was unwilling to take her seriously. "Look at that note again," Linda insisted. "It's a cry for help." "It's a stupid joke." "Believe me," the man shook his head. "I've got a lot more serious things to do here. And you and your note." "What am I to do?" Linda mumbled confusedly. "Go home," replied the investigator, "and throw that note in the bin on your way home and forget about this case. Teenagers do things like that at their age. I'd tell you lots of stories about their weirdness, but I don't have time." Linda walked slowly through the city at night. It was very late, soon to be midnight. Her legs were buzzing with fatigue, but the woman thought of only one thing: how to save the girl. Could this note on the napkin be Cassandra's last chance for salvation? The girl is being bullied by her parents, that much is clear. For Cassandra hid the note from them. What's going on behind the door of their house or flat? What kind of torment is this child enduring? What if the policeman is right, and this is all just a stupid prank? Maybe the parents were only being cold to Cassandra because she's being punished for some similar act. She wanted so badly to believe it and calm down, but Linda saw the look in the girl's eyes. That's hard to play. That child is unhappy, truly unhappy. Linda had a sixth sense of it even before she found the note. I guess I'll have to call, Will, Linda said aloud. Yes, it wasn't an easy decision, but what to do? We had to save the baby, and all means were good for that. Will would definitely help. At least that's the only one of Linda's acquaintances who had such an opportunity, Will. He used to be the closest thing she had to a man. It's funny to think of it now, but years ago she thought he was perfect. Well, the guy seemed so perfect to her, tall, athletic, driven. They met at the grocery shop where Linda worked as a clerk. It was just a small shop selling all sorts of things: groceries, household chemicals, stationery, small things that people in the neighborhood might need at any moment. Will was one of those residents. He often came into the shop for cigarettes, beer, or dumplings. Linda liked this cheerful boy, always cheerful, polite, neatly and stylishly dressed. Sometimes Will appeared alone, sometimes with his mates. Linda realized he didn't have a girlfriend. Not yet. And that made her happy, although she didn't understand why at the time. One day Will came into the shop a little tipsy, a slightly tortured look, a happy smile. Linda didn't find it unpleasant. On the contrary, even a little amusing. "Girl, don't look that I'm a little drunk," Will said. "I'm not a drunkard. I just found out today that I'm being promoted to lieutenant. So I'm excited. I've waited so long for this." "I didn't think anything bad of you," Linda smiled at the handsome visitor. And it was the truth. "I'm happy for you. Congratulations. I've dreamed of working for the police since I was a kid, catching criminals and all that. I must have seen a lot of films. But they told me I couldn't do it because of my health. And because my father was in prison. I didn't really know him. He's been traveling around the colonies all his life. And yet, just like that. But I still dreamed. So I went to law school," Will continued. "I got in, by the way, and worked at the station as a counselor for a couple of years in a non-certified position for pennies. And finally, today I was shown the order, and I was promoted." There were no other visitors in the shop, so Linda listened to Will quietly, in no hurry. It was very pleasant to talk to a handsome guy like that. It was interesting to learn something personal about him. Turns out Will had a dream. And now it's finally come true. "It's so nice when dreams come true," Linda smiled. "But if you want something badly enough, it always happens. Do you?" Will looked intently into the eyes of the young saleswoman. That look made Linda's heart flutter, and goosebumps ran down her spine. "Are you dreaming about something too?" Linda was confused. Yes, she had a dream. But to tell Will's innermost thoughts to a drunken Will now, how could I do that? It's too personal. Linda was living alone by then. Her father had moved to another city and had a new family. Linda wondered whether her parents were just as indifferent and cold with the children of their passions, or whether they were trying to pretend friendliness in order to appear better than they really were. Mum was gone. The still young woman left suddenly, right at work. She had a heart attack. At the time of the tragedy, Linda was already an adult. She was studying at a pedagogical university and was going to become a history teacher. Linda adored children and was able to find a common language with them. It was her mother who advised her daughter to study to become a teacher. "You go straight to the teacher," repeatedly said her mother. "People like you should definitely go to school." Linda nodded her head in agreement. Yes, her mother was right. Linda's place was with the children. After her father left, Linda's mother had a hard time. There was a catastrophic lack of money. That's when she started working double shifts. It was necessary to put her daughter on her feet. There was no hope for her ex-husband in this respect. No, until Linda's 18th birthday, he paid child support. But as soon as the girl came of age, all help stopped. Herein pulled the mother from the last strength to feed herself and her daughter. The work was hard, physically exhausting. Linda felt sorry for her parents, tried to help her in everything. She even wanted to drop out of university to get a job. But her mother was categorical in this matter. And do not think we'll live somehow. It's nothing. How long do you have left to study? You'll get a higher education, you'll become a teacher, a respected man. You won't have to work with your hands like me, ruining your health. Linda decided that she would definitely become a teacher. And not just any teacher, but the best. She would go to work in a gymnasium where they paid more, and her mother would no longer have to work so hard. But Mom didn't live to see it. When Linda was a student, she was left all alone in the world, and she had to leave the university. Linda had to provide for herself. So she got a job as a clerk in a shop in the courtyard. There was no thought of lost opportunities. Diploma, education, career as a teacher, all this became somehow unimportant against the background of the grief that fell on Linda. Mom was her nearest and dearest person. She loved her daughter so much, understood her so well, cared for her, supported her. And now Linda felt lost, as if she had lost her footing. To herself, she seemed thin, fragile, freezing, lonely and sad. No one loved her anymore. No one cared how she felt. And ever since then, Linda only dreamed of having someone close to her, someone who understood and accepted her. Someone with whom she could share her joys and sorrows. The girl dreamed of a family, of a kind and handsome husband, at least 3 children, that the flat was warm, noisy and cheerful. It is unbearable to live alone, not even a word with whom to exchange. I can't tell Will about this secret dream, though I want to reveal my soul to someone. And here the guy himself is interested. He is looking at her attentively and obviously waiting for an answer. Well, I was not. I dream of a family, said the girl and immediately lowered her eyes. A family? Will sounded surprised. He suddenly looked at Linda with warmth and sympathy. The girl even felt a little lighter in her heart. Will. It was as if he understood at once. Is it hard? Linda nodded. Yes, it was hard. It was hard to live without her mother, to cope with everything alone, and to realize that no one cared about you. No one at all. Orphans are at least placed in foster care. They're looking for adults to look after them. And Linda's kind of an adult herself, so she should be able to handle things on her own. And it doesn't matter that she's just over 20, and she has no life experience at all. Somewhat unnoticed by herself, Linda told Will her story. He listened attentively, didn't interrupt. He nodded somewhere, or put a phrase in the right place. Linda could see that he was really interested in all this. He wasn't wasting his time on her out of politeness. You know, why don't we go for a walk sometime? Will suddenly suggested it. Not sometime, but tomorrow. I'm not really in shape today. What time do you get off work? Night shift, 8. I'll be there at 8 tomorrow, Will smiled. You know, I've liked you for a long time. Pretty, very modest, quiet. Not like the other girls. But I've been hesitant to talk to you. I thought you'd send me away. But now, after everything you've told me, I realize what you're like. Well, can I pick you up tomorrow? Come in, Linda nodded, amazed. Will called her beautiful and even asked her out on a date. Is that what's really going on? The girl spent the next 24 hours in joyful anticipation of the evening, but she was also anxious. Well, sure. What if Will just called her out of pity? Or because he'd been drinking, and now he regrets what he did? Or maybe he's forgotten all about that conversation. What if Will doesn't show up? But he arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. The young man was waiting for Linda on the porch of the shop with 3 roses in his hand. Linda's heart beat with joy. She had never been given flowers before in her life. It was so nice, it turned out. Will took her to a cafe, and then they walked around the city and talked for a long time. The guy told his companion about himself. I grew up in a large family. What kind of family? A mother of 3 sons. One pulled because her husband was touring prisons. It wasn't a good fit. Stealing, fighting, robbery. The parent loved adventure, and a life of routine depressed him. The mother feared more than anything that one of her children would follow in their father's footsteps. That's why she kept a strict watch over the boys, did not let her sons down. She had plenty of energy and strength, enough for all 3 of them. whether it was their mother's unrelenting supervision or just their genes. But Will and his brothers had all made it in the world. The eldest, Terrence, worked in a car service. The middle one, Jasper, trained as a machinist. I'd always wanted to be a police officer, Will continued, which wasn't a very typical wish for the son of a recidivist. That's why I went to law school after 9th grade, and then even went to university after the army. Everyone said it wouldn't work out, but it did. I'm a lieutenant now, Will rejoiced. Do you like the job? You're not disappointed? Linda asked. On the contrary, it's becoming clearer every day. I realize that I am where I am, Will answered. Linda was genuinely happy for him. He was moving up the career ladder quite quickly, but he had to work hard. Will was at work 24 hours a day. Sometimes he was called suddenly, and then had to abandon all the planned cases. But Linda treated it all with understanding, didn't beg for attention, and wasn't capricious, as one might expect from a young person. Work is work. Soon they began to live together in the flat that her mother had inherited from her grandmother. Will rented a room nearby. The girl herself suggested moving in together. He was very nice. Will could do everything around the house. Linda with him forgot what is falling off wallpaper or a leaky tap. And he was no stranger to cooking. And other women's chores, laundry, ironing, and so on. Most importantly, Linda finally had a close and understanding person who would listen, understand, support. Will himself had not too simple fate. He understood the girl like no one else. With him, Linda felt like behind a stone wall. Will made a good salary. He gave his girlfriend gifts, clothes, jewelry, handbags, shoes, and cute trinkets that warmed her heart the most. Soft toys, sweets, flowers. With Will, Linda first went to the sea, and then he renovated the flat, transformed it beyond recognition. It was a little sad that now the rooms were not the same as they had been when Mum was there. But at the same time, Linda was relieved that after the renovation there was nothing to remind her of the tragedy and loneliness. It was a fresh start. Then there was a wedding, modest, without a feast in a cafe and a crowd of guests at Linda's place. She simply had no one to invite. Will himself did not want a lavish celebration. However, his mother Nicholas arranged a holiday for the newlyweds, invited them to her house, and set the table. Homemade, delicious food, homemade snacks. They sat in a close family circle, the newlyweds, Will's brothers with their other halves and children, and the head of the family, the mother. Everyone wished the newlyweds to have children as soon as possible, and as many as possible. Will and Linda themselves very much wanted to become parents. The lovers had already discussed this issue many times. We will definitely have a son, Will dreamed. I will be a real father to him. I will spend all my time with him. We'll be best friends, Linda smiled quietly. She understood why Will wanted a son so much. He wants to give him everything he didn't have. First of all, an attentive and caring father. The girl was pleased with this attitude of her beloved, but she herself dreamed of children. At the thought of what a happy, strong family they would have, breathtaking. Linda had recently prepared names for future sons and daughters, and Will, voicing them, approved. Everything was working out just fine, except that the desired pregnancy did not come. At first, the spouses did not worry about it. A month earlier, a month later, what difference does it make? Both worked, arranged their family nest, traveled. They could not afford foreign resorts, but they regularly flew to their native coast every summer. A year passed, then another. Still no heirs. Linda was already panicking, but she didn't want to go to the doctors. It was as if the young woman felt afraid of hearing a serious diagnosis. Will was more optimistic. You're always getting yourself worked up, he reassured his wife. Go, take medication, maybe you have to drink. Everyone heals. I want to hold my son in my arms. Will really dreamed of children. He'd make a great father. And Linda was beginning to feel that her life was too empty and meaningless without babies. But she went to the hospital. At the antenatal clinic, she was given a lot of tests. Linda obediently took everything that was required. The results were almost perfect. Then they sent her for an ultrasound. That's when it all came out. It turned out Linda had a congenital pelvic abnormality. It doesn't interfere with her life, but it does interfere with motherhood. What am I going to do? Linda burst into tears at the doctor's office. A middle-aged woman looked at the girl with sympathy. Honey, do not be upset. Science does not stand still. Maybe someday they'll be able to do an operation that fixes it. But right now, your only option is surrogacy. Linda was relieved when she heard that. Smiling, she thanked the doctor. If she had one chance, she would certainly take it. But at home, Linda carefully studied the information about surrogacy and realized that no, it wasn't for them. The cost is prohibitive and the risks are great. There are so many stories of surrogate mothers not giving their children back to the parents. There's no legal framework, so there's no guarantees. But the main thing is, she and Will just don't have that kind of money, and there's nowhere to get it. That's it. The dream will never come true, Linda told her husband in the evening. For the first time since they had known each other, he looked confused and bewildered. Linda understood what her husband was thinking. She was thinking the same thing herself. How could it be? They were dreaming, planning, hoping. And then all of a sudden this happened. Linda wanted Will, as usual, to put his arm around her, stroke her hair, tell her that everything would be all right. But he said, "I need to be alone," and went into the bedroom. Linda was left alone in the living room with her worries. They then did not talk about it, continued to live, as if by inertia went to work, together at breakfast and dinner, watching TV, lying on the sofa in the evenings. But there was tension between the spouses, which was very hard on both of them. Let's live as we live," Will said one day. "You know how much I want to be a father. Do you want kids too?" "I'm well aware of that. We both need a break. We'll see." Linda nodded. Will's right. What else can they do? Should they live the life they're living? Linda visited several other doctors. The verdict was unequivocal. They all said with one voice that a young woman could not carry a baby on her own, and there was nothing that could be done about it. Somehow Linda gradually came to terms with it. Although it wasn't easy, Will looked as if he too had accepted reality. He was joking again, smiling again. But he didn't talk about future plans anymore. He was a little colder too. Linda looked with horror for signs of her indifferent, aloof father in her beloved. And she did. It was very frightening. The woman calmed herself. After all, they had been married for several years. The period of passionate love is long past. The passions have subsided. Will has a lot of work to do. He doesn't have time for tenderness. And yet Linda missed the old Will and their easy, light relationship. It was different now. A lot of things were gone. The trust, the warmth, a bright future filled with children's laughter. One day Linda suggested to her husband that he take a child from the orphanage. What about it? Is that an option? How many orphans are there in orphanages in need of parental support? Why not make an underprivileged child happy? Noel shook his head. I don't think so. I don't want to raise the offspring of an alcoholic or a criminal. Genes, they can show up at any moment. And you won't know what kind of child you are. My mom's been scared of me and my brothers all my life. Lucky we didn't take after our father. What if we weren't? Linda didn't argue. She realized that such a big decision had to be made together. Linda herself would have taken someone else's baby as her own. There was so much unspent warmth in her, she wanted to protect and care for the little man. Will made it clear that he only wanted his own child and nothing else. Well, he had every right to take that view. Perhaps I'll be able to change my husband's mind someday, Linda thought. There's always hope. Maybe Linda would succeed sooner or later. Just in case, she studied databases of orphaned children. They were all so sweet, so defenseless, so unremarkable. She wanted to hug and warm each one. But it was too soon. Will wasn't ready to do that yet. But then something happened that rocked Linda's world. Something she never expected. Will came home late from work, as usual. He had been staying out late a lot lately. Will had talked about a lot of things in the pipeline, so he had to work overtime. He looked a little strange. Linda noticed it right away. His eyes lit up with a joyful fire, a smile on his face, which the man tried in vain to hide. Did something happen? Linda asked. She thought her husband had been promoted again, or that he had solved a long-standing case. But Linda had no idea what she would hear in answer to her question. We need to have a serious talk, Will said. The joyful light in his eyes suddenly faded. His face became serious and impenetrable. It was as if the mere sight of his wife had spoiled his mood. He was clearly uncomfortable being around Linda, and it was frightening. "What is it?" Linda looked at her husband anxiously. "Let's sit down, shall we?" And Will, occasionally faltering and looking away, told about everything. And about his worries, unfulfilled dreams of children, about physical and moral fatigue, about the cooling of feelings for the man who once seemed the closest and dearest, and about the mental turmoil about it. It turned out that Will had been hurt and hard lately. Only he tried not to show it. Linda did not notice, because she was absorbed in her own thoughts about unfulfilled plans and dreams. At that very moment, 2 undergraduates were sent to the station where Will worked. The boy was sent to the homicide department, but the girl was attached to Will. He had a lot of routine paperwork to do. So they sent this young lady to be his assistant. The girl was pretty, more than pretty. But Will did not think about anything but work, until one day she confessed her love to him. Jill had looked at Will devotedly during that confession. There were even tears in her eyes. And the man understood that the girl's words were more than sincere. Why would she need him in principle? Not rich, not particularly influential, and he was not handsome. Whatever the case, it turns out that Jill fell in love. That suddenly hurt the man's ego. But such a beautiful girl, and suddenly fell in love with him, a simple investigator. Will, as best he could, explained to the beautiful trainee that they are not a couple, not suitable for each other at all. She needed someone younger, more promising and unmarried at least. But Jill was quite persistent. She was determined to achieve her goal. Of course, one day Will couldn't resist. They became lovers. Linda listened to her husband and slowly died inside. But how could it be? I mean, she believed Will more than she believed herself. She thought they were just going through a rough patch. "Anyway, I've been living between 2 fires for months now," Will continued. He looked unhappy, as if he'd been cheated, betrayed, not betrayed. Perhaps it was his conscience that kept him from being overtly happy. "Well, thank you for the truth," Linda said with difficulty, trying to keep her voice steady and calm. "If you're telling me this, something must have happened. A decision must have been made." Linda hoped that now he would apologize, say that he realized how wrong he had been, that he had made a mistake, that he had lost his temper, that he was sorry, and Linda would forgive him. Of course she would. It'll take time to get back to the way things were, but together they'll get through it. Who doesn't make mistakes? "You see, today Jill told me that." Will sighed heavily. "Well, she's expecting a baby. Can you believe it?" Will couldn't help smiling happily. It lit up his face with a warm glow. The man even squared his shoulders, as if he had shrugged off a load of guilt. Linda, on the other hand, folded herself against the sharp pain in her chest. Her breath even caught at the news. Will leave? Of course, now he's going to leave for that Jill. Will had dreamed so much about having children, and here was a young seductress fulfilling his wish. She, Linda, couldn't and wouldn't. Will have a child in his family, maybe even more than one. And Linda will live alone in her mom's flat, just like before. Alone again, abandoned by everyone, unwanted by anyone. "Go away," the woman said quietly. "What?" Will didn't hear her. "Get out of my flat." Will nodded. Then he looked anxiously at his wife. "Are you sure you're going to be all right? Do you think I'm going to do anything to myself because of you?" Linda grinned. To be honest, those were the thoughts that had flashed through her mind in the first few moments. "I'm so sorry, you're good. You don't deserve someone like me," Will said. "You're good too," Linda wanted to scream, but instead she turned round and went into the other room. "You can pick up your stuff tomorrow when I'm at work. Now get out." Will left. Linda sobbed for a long time afterwards, burying her face in his jumper. It was the jumper she'd taken to work early that morning, something to remember her spouse by. For some reason, Linda wanted that, to keep at least one of Will's things with her. She probably still loved him, despite the betrayal. They divorced. Linda was alone in her flat again. She had 2 cats to keep her from getting bored. She got one from a shelter and picked up the other one on the street, skinny and hungry. It took a long time to put him back in order, but it was worth it. and Linda quit her job. For some reason, she didn't want to stay in that very shop where she had once met Will. It hurt to be there. Linda found another job. She got a job as a waitress in a family cafe. People with children came here, talking, joking, ordering goodies. Linda, who from an early age loved to take care of children, was able to realize her talents at work. As she looked at all these families, she felt better for some reason. Different faces, different stories, different situations, it somehow distracted her, reminded her that she was not alone in the world. Some little visitors refused to eat. Some were cranky because they had to sit peacefully at the table and wait for the order to arrive, and some were just in a bad mood. Linda had a feel for children. She always knew what to say to a child to cheer them up, to make their little eyes shine with joy. The owner of the cafe appreciated the waitress for the way she knew how to get along with the little ones. Will married Jill and took out a mortgage on a flat for the family, large, spacious, in an upscale neighborhood. His salary allowed him to afford such a payment, as Will was promoted again. Soon he had a son so long awaited, so desirable. And Will kept his promise. He became a wonderful father. Linda met her ex-husband with their young son several times, then at the amusement park, then in the public garden, then in the shopping center. Will gently led the boy, who looked remarkably like him, by the handle and glowed with happiness and pride. It suited him to be a father. Linda was not jealous. She was happy for her ex-husband. Her heart snapped with another longing. It would be great if it was her and Will's son. But Linda wasn't destined to be a mother. Linda didn't want to meet her ex-husband, so when she happened to see him from afar, she turned the other way. Too painful, too awkward. After the divorce, Will had told Linda not to hesitate to contact him if she needed anything. She had nodded in agreement, knowing full well that under no circumstances would she go to Will for help. Not under any circumstances. Not enough for him to do anything for her out of guilt and pity. But it seems like a waste. Will's the only one who can help under the circumstances. He's a police officer, after all, and he's certainly not going to dismiss Linda and her strange story. Linda decided to wait until morning. It was already late at night. She didn't dare to bother Will at such a time. The next day, just before dawn, the woman dialed her ex-husband. "Hello, Will," the woman said when she heard the voice of the man she had once loved. "It seems I finally need your help." "No questions. Come, I'm at work now. I'll tell them to let you in." Will had changed. He'd put on a little weight. His hair had turned gray, and his eyes were peaceful. "Hi," he smiled, rising from his chair for her. A charming, wide smile. It used to send shivers down Linda's spine. And now it was nice to look at Will like that, smiling, friendly. No awkwardness, no tension, anger or resentment. Their meeting had not started the way Linda had imagined. It was as if two friends had accidentally seen each other after a long separation. First, they talked a little about life. It turned out that Will is a father of 2 children. Recently, the family added a daughter. Linda was sincerely happy for her ex-husband, just the kind he'd dreamed of. "So what's going on with you?" Will's eyes suddenly became serious and attentive. "You need my help, don't you?" Linda nodded and told Will everything that had happened to her the day before. She showed him the note the girl had left behind, of course. Now that piece of paper was always in her purse as a reminder that she hadn't imagined what had happened. Wow. Will scrutinized the letters scribbled hastily on the napkin with a pencil. Her parents are probably bullying this kid. If it's her parents at all, and not her kidnappers. I'll get the security tapes now, find out who these people are. We'll get to the bottom of this. Thank you, Linda thanked Will sincerely. It was so nice to feel his support and understanding. She should have been afraid to contact her ex-husband. Will called a day later. Well, we found out who these people are. The man came straight to the point. It's the family of businessman Nicholas Johnson. Nicholas Jones is not the one who owns the dairy? That's the one Will confirmed. Well, not a huge factory, he has a small factory, more like, but their products are sold in many places in the city and are considered to be good. Nicholas Jones is a medium-sized businessman, not an oligarch, but a very wealthy citizen, especially by the standards of their city. A respected man who regularly made charitable donations and participated in campaigns to help the poor. An entrepreneur who led his factory to success with a steady hand. He paid great attention to the quality of dairy products. A frequent character in the local press and an exemplary family man. Nicholas preferred not to talk about his family. He didn't want any of his family to suffer from too much attention. That's how he explained the fact. But Will, of course, found out everything. His wife was a middle-aged lady who had had a bad marriage. Jen came from a poor family. She and Nicholas were once schoolmates. It seems that the future entrepreneur was unrequitedly in love with her. The object of his adoration was the most popular girl in school. So Nicholas, who then became unattractive outwardly, lacked any other merits, had only to dream of a beautiful girl. Time passed. Life has put everything in its place. Nicholas, characterized by diligence in his studies, natural ingenuity and incredible persistence, founded his own dairy mini-empire. He became rich and even famous. The girl, who once occupied all the thoughts of the future businessman, bet on her beauty and lost. Endless dates, outings, a cycle of novels. In the end, Jen was left alone with a newborn daughter in her arms. The father of the baby was not going to recognize the child and somehow participate in his upbringing. He disappeared altogether. Jen raised her daughter alone, and then she had a chance meeting with Nicholas. And whether the businessman's feelings flared up with renewed vigor, or whether they didn't die down at all, perhaps the man simply decided to close his eyes. Anyway, he proposed to a former classmate. She happily grasped him like a drowning man grasping at straws. So they became a family: Nicholas, his high school sweetheart, and her daughter Cassandra. The girl just at that time went to the first grade. At first everything was fine, but later, when Cassandra was going through puberty, she debuted in an illness. It happens sometimes. The girl was given a psychiatric diagnosis. She was pulled out of school, homeschooled. But she didn't seem sick, Linda countered. Weird, yes, but not sick. Smart, conscious, Will replied. Well, you're not a psychiatrist. I've seen a lot of things. Sometimes it's completely invisible in people. And then there's a fit of aggression or delirium. It's a scary thing. I don't know. So your note is just a manifestation of illness. Cassandra is sick, and very sick. And her family, she's a model. The girl is clothed. She goes to rehab, camps. Nicholas spares no expense. Often travels with her parents. She's doing well. There's no reason to mess with this family. No legal reason, I mean. So there you go. I did the best I could. Thank you, Linda thanked her ex-husband. Somehow she couldn't believe in the truth of the information he had obtained. It all seemed like some kind of beautiful facade. What was behind it? That was anybody's guess. Cassandra may be sick. But she's unhappy with her family and very afraid of her parents. You can tell. Will, can you give me the Johnson's home address, please? What's that for? The man was wary. I'm not going to spy on them or anything. No, of course not. I just want to get another look at the girl, just a glimpse of her, to make sure I wasn't imagining it, her battered look, the intimidation in her eyes. It's weird, but okay, write it down. Just be careful. And if you have any problems, call me right away. An hour later, Linda was standing in front of Nicholas' mansion. It was her day off, so the woman decided to take advantage of her free time. The two-story cottage was located in an elite country village. There were a lot of similar houses. There were real palaces with pointed roofs, annexes, and turrets. Nicholas's mansion was modest enough against the background, but it was very beautiful, stylish, and somehow cozy. It looked like the home of a model family. The house was surrounded not by a hedge, but by a metal lattice, through which the garden, the pool, the playground with swings and slides were clearly visible. The gazebo was just a paradise for a child. The guardianship authorities, seeing this splendor, would not think that a girl living in such conditions needs help. But Cassandra was in danger. Linda was convinced of that. Will's story was not credible. Linda didn't know what she should do. She just stood there looking around the house. At least this way she was closer to Cassandra. Suddenly, just as Linda was about to leave, the cottage door swung open. She appeared on the porch. The same girl who had written the note on the napkin in despair. Skinny, touching, defenseless, and fragile. Once again, she was wearing a baggy, long-sleeved jumper and jeans. It was a sunny and hot July day. It would have made more sense to see Cassandra in shorts and a tank top, or even a swimming costume. In this heat, you could only splash around in the pool. But no jumper, Jean's strange combination. There were a lot of strange things about this story in general. Linda looked around and called the girl's name. She flinched in surprise, then looked at Linda carefully, and seemed to remember her. "Are you the waitress from that cafe? I recognized you. Did you find my note?" Cassandra started the conversation. "Yeah, tell me what's going on with you." I can't believe one person believed me. The girl clutched at the bars. "You know, wherever I have not left such messages, and on holiday and in local cafes. But no one ever even interested. They probably didn't believe it. You're the first." "Girl, tell me what's going on with you, and how can I help you?" "I'll tell you. But you probably won't believe your stepfather and mother. They always make it sound like it's my fault because I'm supposedly insane. I have an official diagnosis. And you know, no matter what I say, they usually take it as a delusion, as a manifestation of illness." The girl spoke cheerfully and coherently. Linda noted that her speech was well developed, like that of a literate adult. Cassandra looked straight and aware. She did not look like a sick teenager at all. "I believe you, don't worry about it, or I wouldn't be here. It took me some trouble to find your house. You didn't leave an address." "I didn't have time. They're always watching me when we're both in public. It took me a lot of trouble to write that note and leave it. I took a risk. If my stepdad had noticed, he'd have locked me up for months, forbidden me to go out to the garden. It's happened before. And now you will not be noticed, will not be punished for talking to me, a stranger." The girl smiled. "There are only servants in the house, but there is a general cleaning. They do not have time for me. From the windows of the house, this area is not visible. Parents are absent, stepfather at work. Mom's gone to the spa. Won't be back till late tonight. It's a good time to talk." "Tell me about it," Linda asked. "Do you mind if I play the video? It's just that I might need proof. I don't think I can do anything on my own, but I have a friend in the police force. Only he needs hard evidence to make a move." "A friend in the police force is a good thing," the girl said. "It gives me hope. And about the camera? I was going to suggest that myself. If the police don't help, we could put it on the internet or get the press involved. We might need the publicity." Linda was once again struck by the teenage girl's turn of phrase. She switched on the camera on her phone, as long as it had enough charge. This is going to be a long story. "My name is Cassandra," she began, looking into the lens. "I'm being bullied by my parents. I need your help." "I'm going to tell my story from the beginning," Cassandra said. "I lived with my mother, Jen, in a small, cramped studio flat with a 6-foot kitchen. It was an old 5-story building on the outskirts of town. Right behind it was a vacant lot with a motorway behind it. Money was tight. Jen didn't like to work. From time to time, of course. She had to get a job. The single mom's allowance was enough to live on. She worked as a cleaner and a market clerk. But all these jobs depressed the woman who had dreamed of a beautiful life since high school and thought she deserved it. Jen was a real beauty in her youth. She, in adulthood, was distinguished by a very favorable appearance, tall, slender, big eyes. She had plenty of admirers at school and now, but the quality of her current suitors didn't suit her. They were all tramps as poor as she was. "Well, it's the environment's fault," Cassandra continued. "As they say, you can't live with the wolves. The places where Jen lived and sometimes worked were not full of princes in white Mercedes. But that's okay, at least the wool from the sheep. The local admirers also got paid sometimes, so I could get something out of them. I felt happy then, even though I lived in terrible conditions: mold on the walls, old cockroaches, secondhand furniture, rusty wiring, meager food. But I had freedom. I ran around the yard all day long with the neighborhood kids like me. We had fun together, we laughed, invented interesting games, climbed trees. I loved my mum very much and thought she was the most beautiful in the world. She, of course, also loved me in her own way and took care of me. But very often Jen would cry after another failure in her personal life. And then she'd start blaming me for things a girl wouldn't understand. If I hadn't given birth to you then, I'd be married to a decent man by now, she said. And with this trailer, who needs me anyway? Jen said. Cassandra shrank back from these words. She felt very guilty. She just didn't know how to help her mother, how to fix the situation. Fortunately, these moments were rare and didn't last long. Jen was quickly becoming herself a cheerful and adventurous woman. Her mother sometimes dressed Cassandra up, gave her makeup, called her a pretty doll. The girl rejoiced. She was happy that she could please her mother in some way. When you grow up, you'll be a beauty. We'll marry you off to a rich man. And you and I won't have to worry, Jen said. Just don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't give up on the little things. Yeah, cause I'll be there for you. I'll help you. I'll help you. I'll guide you. I'm wise now. Cassandra, who was 6 or 7 at the time, could not understand what her mother was saying, but she nodded and smiled, just to please her parent. And then Uncle Nicholas Jones came into her mother's life. Cassandra liked the man at first. He smiled at the girl, often bought her toys and sweets. He treated her mother very well, like a princess. Jen blossomed beside him, became even more beautiful, even more charming. And her eyes shone with a special light. She looked at Uncle Nicholas with such adoration, such hope. And he often hugged her and kissed her. Cassandra would later realize that Uncle Nicholas was just pretending to be kind. Uncle Nicholas and I have decided to get married, a happy Jen told her daughter one day. He proposed to me. Now Uncle Nicholas is going to be your daddy. We're going to live far away from here in a very nice house. You will have your own room, your own bed, a beautiful bed. Just like a princess, and lots of toys. It all sounded like some kind of fairy tale story. Cassandra could not even imagine this house, this garden, though her mother had described to her in color the place where they would soon live. Little Cassandra's life changed dramatically. It took Cassandra a long time to get used to the luxury around her. It was unbelievable. A room of her own with a bed under a pink canopy and shelves full of new toys. A pool in the garden where you could splash around as much as you wanted. Swings, merry-go-rounds and free access, obliging people in uniform, offering for breakfast, lunch and dinner mind-boggling dishes. All this made the girl dizzy with the abundance of impressions during the period of adaptation. Cassandra was so tired that at 8 o'clock in the evening she fell exhausted on her princess bed and fell asleep. However, Cassandra still lacked a few things. Firstly, it was not customary to walk outside the fence here, and she wanted to explore the neighborhood. But you can't, so you can't. Secondly, the girl missed her friends, the boys and girls Cassandra had grown up with. She missed them very much. One day she asked her mother if she could invite them here for a day. "Oh no," Jen said with a shrug. "I don't want that gypsy Tabor showing up here. Forget your street kids. Soon you'll have new friends, boys and girls from decent families." Mother had changed a lot. Outwardly, Jen had become so beautiful that she was a sight to behold. Now she spent a lot of time in beauty parlors and even worked out at the gym. Jen made friends with similarly beautiful and well-groomed women. They often met, sat in cafes, went shopping, and just walked around. Her mother looked happy and often said aloud that this was the life she deserved. Jen paid almost no attention to her daughter at that time. The woman tried to get home by the time Nicholas came home from work. And when he appeared, all Jen's attention was directed to her husband, which apparently he liked very much. Cassandra, on the other hand, didn't get much attention. Her mother was focused on Nicholas, on her new friends and hobbies, on anything but her own daughter. Jen literally reveled in her own life, forgetting about Cassandra. Cassandra was looked after by her nanny, a woman with a stern and slightly arrogant face. The girl was afraid of her, but she obeyed her without question. The nanny prepared the girl for school, taught her letters and numbers, made her write curlicues and circles in her copybooks. At first, the nanny was outraged by the child's pedagogical neglect. "Did you grow up with wolves in a pack?" she wondered. "Can't you know such elementary things at the age of 7? But Cassandra was making rapid progress, and the nanny soon changed her mind. "That girl will make a good girl," she said of her pupil. And then school began. Cassandra was sent to a prestigious gymnasium, which was not cheap. The children spent all day in the school, first lessons, then recreation, then extra classes. Cassandra quickly made friends with her classmates. At first they seemed strange to her, too quiet, too boring, not like her backyard friends, whom she still missed very much. Cassandra was surprised that these kids didn't know basic games: catch up, hide and seek with cans. She had taught them, of course. The girl's new acquaintances came to be absolutely delighted. From then on, Cassandra became something of a leader among the new acquaintances. She was the one who came up with fun activities and events that her friends always took up with joy and interest. But teachers and tutors often scolded Cassandra for her excessive initiative. It was much more profitable for them to deal with calm, obedient children. They offered board games and modeling between classes. But they had already got a taste of other entertainment. They were just children. One day during a game of dodgeball, which started in the school corridor, one boy accidentally smashed a glass cabinet with gymnasium awards with a ball. Shards flew everywhere, and one of them injured a girl. Not too serious, fortunately, but the blood in the infirmary stopped for a long time. There was a huge scandal. The parents of the injured pupil were outraged. How could it be that the administration of such an expensive, prestigious gymnasium could not ensure the safety of children? Cassandra was also hurt. The principal shouted at the little girl, whom the teacher almost by the ear brought to his office, accused her of having a bad influence on other children, called her promiscuous. And then, right in front of Cassandra, he called Nicholas and invited him in for a serious talk. Cassandra was sitting outside the office on the couch when Nicholas and Jen walked briskly to the principal's office. At first, the girl felt relieved they were family after all. She was scared and hurt. She didn't understand what she was guilty of and why she was being shouted at now. But her stepfather gave her stepdaughter such an icy stare that she was even more afraid. The mother did not look at her daughter at all. She looked pale, worried, guilty. Cassandra couldn't hear what the adults were saying to the principal. Both parents were silent all the way home. Her mother occasionally turned to her daughter and looked at her with a mixture of annoyance and disappointment. That look made the girl want to fall through the ground. And at home, Nicholas beat the girl. It was the first time, but it would not be the last. He whipped Cassandra, who tried to dodge, fiercely with the belt right on her legs and arms. It left red streaks on her skin, but that didn't stop the man. "You filthy, savage brat," Nicholas said. "I've had to listen to so much reproach because of you. Bad, spoiled genes, you bitch. Well, nothing, I'll teach you. Savages have no place in my house." It was painful, hurtful, scary. Nicholas held his victim tightly, and Cassandra could only twitch, unable to dodge the blows. Her eyes were dark with pain. And her mother? She stood by her side and didn't even try to stand up for her daughter. On the contrary, when it was over, she hugged Nicholas and began to comfort him. Not her battered child. Cassandra didn't go to school the next day because she had a fever. Then there was the weekend, during which the girl recovered. No one felt sorry for her, neither her mother nor Nicholas. They had little contact with Cassandra. That, too, was a punishment. On Monday, the girl was sent to grammar school for the first time, wearing trousers and a long-sleeved blouse to hide the marks of the beating. It was that very first time Cassandra realized that her stepfather hated her. And her mother? Her mother loves her, of course, it's her mom. But Jen is much more attached to the affluent life her husband provides for her, which means she'll always be on Nicholas's side. Nicholas no longer tried to hide his dislike for his stepdaughter. He had the tacit approval of his wife, for whom he still seemed to have strong feelings. And now Cassandra was often the whipping girl. The occasion could be anything: a bad grade, a teacher's remark, a broken plate, an unkempt appearance. Sometimes Nicholas didn't even need a reason. Sometimes he'd come home upset, and then he'd see the hated Cassandra. And it would start. "He must be crazy," the girl said, staring directly into the camera lens. "I think so. You see, he enjoys hitting me." His eyes start to shine with joy. "It's so scary. I'm afraid that one day he'll cross the line and break me." The mother has seen it all and never, not once, even tried to protect her daughter. Sometimes after another beating, Jen would comfort Cassandra. "He means well for you. He's afraid you'll act like a naughty girl. It's just parenting. All loving parents raise their children to be good. You should be glad Nicholas is so caring." But for some reason, Cassandra couldn't be happy. But for a while, she really believed that all this was normal. She'd never had a father before. Maybe that's just how fathers raise their children. Perhaps every one of her classmates was experiencing the same thing. Nicholas tried to hit Cassandra without leaving marks, or leave them in inconspicuous places. When did that fail? Cassandra walked to school in long-sleeved clothes and trousers, hiding the beatings. "No one must know what happened yesterday," Jen told her, "or they'll know what a naughty girl you are because Daddy punished you." And Cassandra believed her mother. She was ashamed of her scars and bruises and hid them from others. But one day, when the marks of the last punishment had not yet worn off, there was a medical examination in the gymnasium. Cassandra was so embarrassed about her bruises. Now everyone would see how naughty she was. The young doctor was horrified by the marks on the little girl's body. "What's the matter with you?" he asked Cassandra. "Where did it come from?" "I fell down the stairs," she mumbled. It was the first thing that came to her mind. It would be better not to tell these people the truth, so that no one would realize how naughty she was. "She's a hyperactive child," confirmed the teacher in the room. "Something is going on with her all the time." Did the teachers know what was happening to me? Cassandra spoke slowly and clearly so that every word would reach those who would watch the video. I'd like to think they didn't. Because if they knew and kept quiet, because of Nicholas's money and connections, then I'm just horrified at the cruelty of this world. At these words, the girl smiled at the camera. The woman, who was in shock at the story of this child, found the strength to smile back. And Cassandra was growing up. Nicholas was still taking out his anger on his stepdaughter. Jen still acquiesced to it. Up to a certain age, the girl had thought this was the norm. But then, as she grew older, she began to realize what was wrong. Communication with classmates, films, books, Cassandra absorbed information, becoming wiser and more experienced. And one day she realized that everything that was happening to her was a crime and could not be tolerated. "I went to the director and wrote a statement right in his office," the girl said. "I told them everything, even showed them my bruises and abrasions," Cassandra said. "They said they would look into it. I was so hopeful, I thought the nightmare was over. But it got worse." The headmaster turned to Nicholas, and he made it sound like Cassandra wasn't quite normal. Said they'd already made an appointment for her to see a psychiatrist. The headmaster believed it. Cassandra really did start being dragged round to the doctors. What kind of doctors were they? The girl assumed Nicholas had paid them. That's how a perfectly healthy child got a diagnosis on her chart. "Now everything I said was just nonsense," Cassandra said. "He had total power over me. I became his official whipping girl." Cassandra took a deep breath and continued the story. "I was taken out of school and homeschooled for good measure. I was now studying with teachers in an online format. What now? There's no one to complain about the person who raises you, feeds you, clothes you," Nicholas gloatingly questioned, looking at his stepdaughter. This was not at all the effect the girl had expected from her statement. She was now a prisoner, and in this beautiful house, even the minimal freedom she had left was taken away from her. Cassandra was deprived of communication with anyone except her mother, servants, and stepfather. She was labeled abnormal in the eyes of others. And the cherry on the cake, the girl's internet was cut off. Now she couldn't even communicate on social media. Total isolation. "It's really crazy," Cassandra said. But Nicholas and Jen made it seem like they were perfect parents. They took Cassandra on trips, sometimes taking her to cafes and restaurants. In general, they appeared with the girl in public to avoid suspicion. The beatings continued. Nicholas took all his anger out on his stepdaughter. Each time he went further and further and further. He never touched her face, because it was almost impossible to hide the beatings on her face. Jen kept silent, not only out of a desire to please her husband, but also out of fear. All the beatings and abuse went to her daughter. Who knows, maybe if it hadn't been for this lightning rod, she would have had to pay for her nice, fat life. "I left messages wherever I could," Cassandra said in a shaky voice. "I had spoken calmly before, but now my voice trembled. I tried to call for help, but it was no use. They thought I was crazy. One day Nicholas saw me trying to tell a woman on the street. It wasn't here. We were on holiday in Egypt at the time. He came over, showed the lady a diagnosis certificate, and then beat me so badly I passed out. I spent the rest of the holiday in bed in my room. They'd lock me up and go to the beach, and I thought I was going to die. I even wanted to. But no, I survived. I came round. Baby, how much have you been through? Linda couldn't help herself. He's getting angrier and angrier. I think he's losing his mind. Soon Nicholas will kill me and then make it look like an accident. He's got enough money and connections to do that. I'm scared. I'm very scared. I want to live, but there's no escape. And if I do, they'll bring me back. I mean, we have a happy family and everything for the baby. There's no help. This is my last chance to make a name for myself. Help me. Linda stopped the tape. She looked at the girl with pity and tenderness, and wanted so much to hug this poor child, so much to take her out of this terrible place right now. I'll do anything to get you out of here, the woman promised. And then a hunch suddenly struck her. Cassandra, baby, let us take pictures of your bruises and scars. Show them to me. Cassandra nodded briefly. She quickly rolled up the sleeves of her jumper and rolled up her trousers, and to the amazed Linda's eyes, a terrible picture appeared. Bruises, cuts, abrasions. The girl's entire body, hidden beneath her clothes, was covered with wounds and scars of varying age. Cassandra pulled up her jumper. Her stomach was a solid bruise with yellowing edges. The girl pulled back the neck, a red furrow showing on her thin neck. Linda gasped. Her hands were shaking, but she'd filmed the whole thing. It was frightening to imagine the nightmare the girl was living in. I'm going to the police. I'm going to the station right now, the woman promised the little girl. Thank you, she smiled. You're the first person to believe me. I just wish the police hadn't blamed it on my diagnosis. Nicholas once told the maid who happened to see my cuts on my hands that I was self-mutilating because of my illness. This is a man who has children. He'd believe it. He's got kids himself. He'll understand. It was scary leaving Cassandra alone in the mansion, but how else could she help her? Just get that video evidence to the station as soon as possible. Will reviewed the video several times. His face expressed a variety of emotions: bewilderment, surprise, then anger. What a bastard, the man exclaimed in anger. Linda, you go now. I need to assemble a group, the guardianship authorities, medics. Don't worry, I'll keep you informed. You're going down there right now? No, it's not that quick, but we're going to get the girl out, and soon. She's in a lot of danger. Linda went home. There, next to her favorite cats, she finally let her feelings out. Linda sobbed. She was shivering violently. She was afraid for Cassandra. She didn't understand, truly didn't understand the girl's mother. How could she bear to see her child treated like that? This Jen had been given such a treasure, a beautiful, intelligent daughter, and she did not appreciate the gift of fate and behaved like that. Cassandra ended up fine. Will told me later how the events unfolded. He stopped by Linda's house himself to bring her up to speed. It was so strange to see him back in that flat. Cassandra had just been taken to hospital at first. Nicholas claimed that his daughter had self-inflicted these injuries because of her diagnosis. He again tried to paint his stepdaughter as incompetent. The child welfare officials and the police did not argue with him. They only said that the girl should be examined but also placed temporarily elsewhere. Since the parents could not cope with a sick child, they promised that as soon as the child's condition stabilized, she would be returned to the family. Nicholas was worried, tried to threaten, offered money. He realized how it would all end. The man knew perfectly well that his stepdaughter is absolutely normal, mentally healthy child. This fact was quickly confirmed at the hospital. Cassandra had no psychiatric diagnosis whatsoever. The medical professionals who made it have yet to be dealt with. Examination of the wounds on the teenager's body showed that the girl could not have physically inflicted such injuries on herself. So someone else did it. Who? Considering Cassandra had been inside the walls of the house the whole time. The answer was self-evident. The victim gave a statement. She detailed how and when she received her bruises, cuts, and abrasions. Nicholas was immediately taken into custody. The police were very keen to prosecute the mother. She was, in fact, an accessory to the crime. But Jen managed to get away with it. The woman assured that she lived in mortal fear of her husband, that she was afraid of making things worse, so she kept quiet. That may have been partly true. Jen was just a witness in the case. But the child welfare authorities did initiate a termination of parental rights. Cassandra was in danger with this woman. The mother never once complained about her spouse's actions, never once stood up for her daughter, for reason enough. Cassandra was placed in an orphanage. Linda visited the girl often. She seemed happy and content with her life. "It's nice here, it's peaceful," she said. "I can study, I can socialize with the boys, I can walk in the yard. They take us on excursions. And the most important thing is that I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to be afraid that Nicholas, who came back late at night, angry and upset, will drag me out of bed with something and beat me up. It's such a blessing." Linda could hardly hold back her tears at the time. What kind of life did the girl have if the orphanage was her happiness? They socialized very well and soon became friends. Cassandra was an amazingly bright and cheerful person, despite the fact that she had been through so many trials. Linda sincerely wanted to help her forget all this horror and give her a happy childhood. Cassandra needed warmth and attention. The orphanage is good, but there are so many children here. The carers simply do not have enough time to listen and support each one. Will was the first to know about Linda's decision. The woman called him to find out how to proceed. "You know, I'm not surprised," said the ex-husband. "I knew you'd come to this sooner or later, and I'm very happy for the girl." "So you're going to help me do it?" Linda asked. "Because I don't know where to start." "I'll help you with the adoption we promised. I know some people who get it done quickly, as long as the police agree. But I don't think that will be a problem either." "No problem?" Linda said confidently. The first morning in September was fresh but sunny. For the first time in a long time, this date meant something to Linda. She was seeing her daughter off to 7th grade. Yes, her daughter. Cassandra was now 13 and had grown a lot over the summer. Her old uniform was getting too small. Together they picked out new clothes for the girl to wear to school. They spent a long time shopping, looking for clothes that would fit Cassandra perfectly. It was not an easy task. Linda got a teenager at once, bypassing the stage of cute baby dresses and bonnets. Cassandra was very tall and very thin. Apparently, it's hard to find anything to fit these kids. But that's okay, Linda and Cassandra made it work. "Cassandra, get up. We're late for the line," Linda exclaimed, glancing at her watch. The aroma of fresh toast and coffee wafted from the kitchen. "It's time for breakfast." "Good morning," the girl smiled as she emerged from the bedroom. She was so cute, with disheveled hair. There were no more bruises and abrasions on her arms and legs. Only the scars from particularly deep cuts were reminders of the nightmare of the past. There weren't many of them left all over his body. But nothing. Time would heal everything, smooth everything out. Cassandra walked over to Linda and hugged her. She always did that. The girl missed hugs and warmth. Linda just really wanted someone to care for, someone to look after. The perfect combination for both of them. The younger one got a loving, caring mother. The older one got a grateful, beautiful daughter. Jen had tried to reconnect with Cassandra, calling her, even coming to the school gates. But the girl wasn't ready for that yet. The very sight of Jen was bringing Cassandra back to the hell she had lived in for so many years. Resentment towards her mother, misunderstanding, anger Cassandra still hadn't forgiven her parents. The poor family used their last pennies to feed and shelter the little stray. And when the janitor saw, "Is there going to be anything to eat in this house today, or what?" the head of the family asked loudly and indignantly. "Alex, darling, but we just had dinner." Kate looked at her husband in surprise, who was sitting in front of an empty plate, holding a spoon in his hand, and looked at her expectantly. She had fed the whole family a modest dinner, and she didn't understand exactly what was required of her. The children had long since eaten and gone to their rooms to do their own things. "So it was dinner?" Alex asked ironically. "And I thought that a man should have at least some meat. You can be satisfied with cabbage leaves for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm actually working, bringing money into the family. I thought I was entitled to a decent meal for that money." Kate bit her lip. She realized, belatedly, that the old story was starting again. The same old story that repeated itself every time the month came to an end. Each time her husband approached this conversation in a different way than the previous one. That was why the woman didn't immediately realize what he meant. She sighed heavily. She didn't want to start this useless argument again, which would only lead to another quarrel and nothing more. She had heard all of Alex's arguments many times before, and many times she had answered them with her own. But the couple had never been able to come to an agreement. Nothing new. Kate was sure of it. Neither of them had ever come up with one, which meant that continuing this conversation would be just as pointless as before. Nevertheless, she knew her husband was waiting for her answer, and keeping silent wasn't an option either. She had tried this tactic 2 or 3 times before, and the result had not pleased her at all. Kate began gently. "We've already discussed this many times. Is it worth it again?" "This argument is worth it," her husband interrupted her firmly. "We're going to have this conversation until the situation changes. Or rather, until you get a job," Alex said. "I can't support all of you forever." Kate splayed her hands. "Honey, but how can I go to work? They don't take the younger ones at daycare. There's no places anywhere. We wouldn't have enough for a nanny even if I got a job. But others manage without nannies. They have grandparents, brothers, sisters, but we have no one. I'm an orphan and your parents don't want to babysit so I can get a part-time job. And don't blame it on my parents again. They raised their own kids and they don't have to take care of yours." Kate froze in place, even as she stopped washing the dishes. The word alone hurt her as if her husband had hit her. A physical blow would have been less painful. "What do you mean? With mine," she exclaimed. "They are our children, Alex. You wanted them as much as I did." Alex smirked. "I did, but I changed my mind. We didn't agree that I was going to carry the whole bunch. I thought you'd be on maternity leave, and then, like normal people, you'd go to work. And since you're a housewife, the kids are your responsibility. I had nothing to do with them." Kate felt as if someone had squeezed her throat. Alex never said anything like that. Yes, he'd complained that he was single-handedly feeding his family on his small salary. Yes, lamented that his wife couldn't provide him with what he thought he needed. But never claimed that their shared children had nothing to do with him. As if reading her thoughts and seeing her condition perfectly, Alex seemed to have decided to finally finish his wife off. "And as for those youngest ones, which you so justify your laziness with, I'm not sure that they are from me at all. I worked all day while you were on maternity leave. There's no telling who might have visited you." Kate couldn't bear to hear such unfair accusations, choking back tears. She rushed out of the kitchen and, without realizing how, found herself in the nursery. 6-year-old Sam was looking after his younger brother and sister. He looked up at her in surprise. "Mummy?" he asked in a tone that was unusually serious for his age. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, son. It's all right." Kate belatedly realized her mistake and tried to wipe away her tears discreetly. The boy looked at her attentively, and then shifted his gaze to the younger children and nodded slowly. Obviously, he thought that his mum didn't want to disturb the babies, so he tried to pretend that everything was all right. Kate didn't bother to dissuade him and just quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. She hoped that the next day Sam would have more important things to do and would not remember the incident. The woman had no idea where to put her grief. There were only 2 rooms in the flat, the children's room and the adult room. And in the second one, her husband could come at any moment. Kate didn't want to see him now. Besides, she suspected that he would not give up so easily and would continue to annoy her with his remarks. There was only one way out, despite the late hour, to leave the flat. Of course, it was undesirable to leave the children virtually alone. On the other hand, in such a state, she would not be able to interact with them normally. And so, whether there is an adult in the flat or not does not matter much. The younger ones would still be in Sam's care. At least Kate had no doubt that he'd put them to bed properly, and he'd go to bed on time too. Her son, responsible beyond his years, loved to play with his brother and sister. Of course, the woman tried not to let the children be left alone for long periods of time. But when Sam took to tutoring the younger ones in her presence, she could see that he was doing a fine job. Yes, she was lucky to have a son, and that was the only consolation she had at the moment. She wandered aimlessly down the street, hardly looking around, not even noticing the small and nasty rain that had started. All her thoughts were focused on one single question: how she had come to such a life. how her happy youthful love had ended with her husband openly accusing her of infidelity without any reason. Kate recalled how they met. She is a young economics student at one of the country's leading universities. He was a promising young entrepreneur. Together they seemed to others, and to themselves, just a perfect couple. Their relationship developed like in some romantic fairy tale. Courtship, gifts, restaurants. Huge, gorgeous bouquets of flowers. They both had big futures ahead of them, and hardly anyone could have imagined the poverty and doom in which these people now found themselves. And this fall began, perhaps, at the very moment when Alex began to persistently persuade his future wife to leave the institute. "Why would you do that?" he questioned. "My income is enough for 2 people. You will stay at home, cook, clean, bring up the children, after all." At first, Kate flatly refused to even hear about it. Raised in an orphanage, who had all chances to be at the bottom of life, she, by incredible diligence, and by some miracle managed to get into decent society and now held onto this opportunity with all her might. In the end, however, Alex managed to persuade her that this wonderful new world was not going to get away from her anyway, and at first everything was really good. Kate, as Alex had planned, was doing everyday life in their common house while he was doing his business. They had enough money, even with a surplus. Nevertheless, somehow it didn't work out. There were always some unnecessary but pleasant things that they wanted to buy right now, and perhaps none of them thought that any savings were necessary at that time. "My parents will help us in case of anything," Alex assured his young wife when she timidly started a conversation on the subject. "You know they're not." Poor Kate still didn't know if he believed what he was saying, or if he was deceiving her. Surely that very critical situation would never happen. Anyway, after a while something happened to his business. Kate, without going into details, admitted only that over time it began to give less and less profit, until finally it collapsed completely. And at that moment it turned out that Alex's parents were not going to help the young family. "Except for you," his father told him. "We have younger children who are not yet on their feet. And you are a grown man, and you have to deal with your problems on your own." Then they had to sell the big, fancy flat they lived in and move to a small 2-room flat on the outskirts of the city. Strangely enough, Alex himself was the most dissatisfied with this state of affairs. Apparently, it was the fact that he had spent his whole life in luxury, and now he was forced to live a rather miserable existence. Kate took it with philosophical calmness. She, of course, was also accustomed to a poor life, but she had once led it, and therefore was more prepared for hardship and knew what to do in such circumstances. Quite quickly she found a job. She got a job as a saleswoman in a shop. The salary, of course, was modest, but it was better than nothing. She didn't see any other options for herself. Alex chose a completely different way of solving problems. He went on a long-term binge. Kate didn't blame her husband for anything. Everything happens in life. On the contrary, as a decent wife, she tried to inspire him, calm him down, and support him. And in the end, her endeavors succeeded. Alex stopped drinking and started to develop new business ideas that would allow their family to return to its former wealth and prosperity. However, these ideas always failed. Even if he managed to save the initial sum and start a new business, quite quickly there were all sorts of difficulties that brought Alex's efforts to naught. And the longer it went on, the more unbearable his character became. "I don't have enough money to fully realize my projects," he told Kate frankly. "But what can I do, darling?" she replied. "I'm already taking all the extra shifts I can. I'm working almost no weekends. I just don't have anywhere else to take the time to earn more," Kate said. "Of course, if I'd finished university, it would have been a lot easier. But what's to be sorry about now? This situation should be a lesson to both of us. I need to finish my studies and get a proper job. Besides, like I said, I'll need to save up. But of course, those are plans for when we get out of this." How would we get out of it? Her husband Alex resented. "Well, so that there's more money?" "Maybe," Kate said, stammering shyly, "you could find yourself some part-time work, at least for the weekend." "I don't have time for that," Alex said categorically. "In case you haven't noticed, while you're working for pennies, I'm trying to rebuild the business and bring us back to our former position. And you're not helping me at all." "But I'm really doing the best I can," Kate replied with surprise. No, her husband objected with obvious irritation in his voice. "Not everything. There's something you haven't done. Though I've explained to you repeatedly how important it is to me and to you." Honey, you seem to forget that even though I didn't get a full education, I studied economics for 2 years. What you're suggesting is absolutely insane. Maybe you'll finally start trusting me on things I do know something about. You just don't believe in me? Alex answered in a frustrated voice. You think that once I made a mistake once, I'll repeat them all the time, and I'll never succeed again. After such statements, Kate, of course, immediately rushed to convince her husband that he was deeply mistaken, and no one believes in him as much as she does. Eventually, this conversation would end with nothing, only to begin again the next day. However, no matter how hard Alex tried, there was no way Kate could agree to his plan. And he proposed a very simple thing: to take a large loan in her name, to let this money into business for him, bankrupt and officially unemployed. No bank was willing to lend. So he could not realize his idea without his wife's help. Kate urged him to think about how they would pay back the loan in case of another failure. She was absolutely sure that it was not the way to restore the former status, but to an even deeper hole. And luckily for her, she never gave in to any entreaties from her husband. And then she got pregnant with Sam, and Alex had to leave all his business ideas behind and get a job to be able to feed his family, which was soon to be even bigger. Of course, he wasn't thrilled at the prospect. Both spouses were still convinced that this situation was temporary. Kate did not plan to sit on maternity leave for a long time and was going to go to work as soon as she arranged Sam in the nursery. But even this plan was not destined to come true. There were no places in kindergartens. And soon enough, Kate realized that the nursery was nothing to dream of. Well, if the queue will come up in 3 or 4 years. And then it happened that she got pregnant again. Just when Sam was 3 and she'd already had 2 children. That's when Alex started talking about going back to work. She realized it herself. But how could she do that with 3 small children in her arms? As time went on, her husband became more and more insistent, and the situation didn't change, which eventually led to the ugly conflict that happened that unfortunate evening. That was what Kate was thinking about as she wandered aimlessly in the darkness of the night through the streets of the neighborhood that had become almost dear to her for so many years. Fortunately, although it was on the outskirts of the city, it was considered quite prosperous. Crime was rare here, so it was safe to travel even at this late hour. However, that was the last thing on the woman's mind. Suddenly, a strange thing caught her attention. Kate, immersed in her own unhappy thoughts and memories, did not immediately realize what had alarmed her. Just somewhere in her subconsciousness, it was as if a neon sign flashed, informing her that something in the space around her was wrong. Snapping out of her own musings, the woman looked around and quite quickly discovered the cause of her vague unease. It was a little girl the same age as her Sam. In her smart pink dress, she was sitting on the curb all by herself, staring at the pavement beneath her feet. Kate raised her eyebrows in surprise. She'd never met any street kids in her neighborhood. Not beggars. Beggars, or just wandering the streets, especially at a time like this. Still, there were decent enough people living here to let kids out alone at night. Not rich enough for beggars to be interested in the neighborhood. Besides, the girl didn't look like a street kid, or even just a child from a dysfunctional family. She wore beautiful and clean, obviously new clothes, and she did not behave like a little tramp. The whole situation surprised Kate very much. But this surprise was unimportant, as if it were background. With her mind, she realized all these details much later, when once again she replayed this strange meeting in her head. Now she was only interested in one thing: the child was out at night, so she was in potential danger. It was necessary to give this girl all possible help. With this in mind, she approached the child carefully, so as not to frighten her, and squatted down in front of her so that their faces were at the same level. "Hello," she said quietly and affably. "What is your name?" "I don't know," the girl answered surprisingly calmly. "What is it?" Kate was surprised. "It's like this. I mean, I probably knew it once, but I forgot it." "And who are your parents, and where are they?" "I don't know. I don't remember," she said. "Do you remember anything at all?" Kate asked cautiously. This time the girl did not say anything and just shook her head silently. The woman, however, was not satisfied with this answer. "But how did you get here?" "I came," she answered. "From where?" "From there." The child waved her hand indifferently, showing the direction. What was there? Was it a forest or a park? I don't know. I woke up there and didn't remember anything. I just went somewhere. And now I was tired, so I decided to sit. Kate shook her head, perplexed. She didn't like the situation, and she had no idea what she should do about it. Finally, after some silence and thought, she asked, "Are you hungry?" The girl nodded vigorously, signaling that she hadn't eaten in a long time. "All right," Kate sighed tiredly. "Come with me, I'll feed you and you'll sleep in our flat with my children. And in the morning we'll think about what to do with you. And for convenience, I'll call you Mary for now. Do you mind?" "No," answered the new Mary very indifferently. Taking the girl's hand firmly in hers, Kate went home. All her own troubles and sorrows immediately went out of her mind. That was just the way she was. If someone needed help, her own problems were pushed to the back of her mind. Especially for her, as a mother, she couldn't bear the situation with a neglected child who couldn't even remember his own name. When they reached the flat without any incident, it was already about 2. All of Kate's housemates, as she was immediately convinced, were sleeping peacefully in their beds. The woman was even pricked by a vague resentment. None of them seemed to care where she was at such a late hour. On the other hand, this state of affairs could not please her. Kate had no desire to explain to the children and her husband, especially her husband, where the girl had come from and why she was in their flat. She quietly went to the kitchen, took out the remains of a modest dinner from the fridge and fed the little waif. Once she was full, the girl began to yawn desperately. It was clear that Mia had not only not eaten for a long time, but had not slept for a long time. Kate decided to make up a bed for her on the couch, but she settled down on the floor and, exhausted from the day's work, fell asleep quickly, forgetting to set her alarm clock. As a rule, she got up before anyone else in the house. After all, she had to make breakfast, get her husband ready for work, and her eldest son off to school. Besides, she was the only one in the family who was a lark, and early rising was not only habitual but pleasant for her. But of course, this did not apply when she had to go to bed late. In such circumstances, it was extremely difficult to wake up without an alarm clock. Naturally, Kate overslept, and her awakening was not the most pleasant, as she woke up to someone shaking her roughly by the shoulder. When she opened her eyes, she saw Alex's angry face right in front of her. "I'm late for work," he exclaimed, noticing that his wife had opened her eyes. "Breakfast isn't ready. Are you still asleep?" "Not in bed, but on the kitchen floor." "And explain to me, please, who is that girl snoring on the sofa?" For the first few moments, Kate didn't even realize which girl he was talking about. Then she remembered her night's adventures and tried to explain to Alex what was going on. He listened with a skeptical expression on his face. Then he said that when he got home from work, Mia wouldn't be in their house. Without breakfast, he left for work, leaving Kate to recover. However, even this luxury was beyond her reach. In just a few minutes, the woman realized that her husband probably hadn't bothered to just wake Sam up, let alone getting him ready for school. And sure enough, the baby was sleeping peacefully in his cot. And if Alex was already late for work, it was time for Sam to leave the house. For the first time that morning, Kate looked at the clock and clutched her head. Her son's first class was due to start in 10 minutes. She woke Sam up, made him a quick breakfast, and sent him off to class. It wasn't a long walk to school, and the boy could manage on his own. Nevertheless, Kate realized that he was going to be late anyway, which meant that he, and therefore she, would soon be in trouble. However, Kate wasn't going to think about that right now, as she had other difficulties that required immediate action. Fortunately, all the commotion that had been going on in the house for the previous half an hour had not disturbed Mia's sound sleep. Her savior decided to wait until the girl woke up on her own. In the meantime, she would take care of her own small children and think about what she should do. It took 2 hours for the girl to get up. And by that time, Kate had already developed a clear plan of action. It was time for a walk with the kids, and she decided, taking Mia with her, to look at the nearest police station. After all, that was what law enforcement was for, to deal with cases like this. "So you found this girl on the street last night?" The officer on duty at the station asked her. "That's right. And she can't even remember her name," Kate confirmed again. "That's right." She didn't understand the point of this procedure. The woman had already told the whole story once, and then told it again in a written statement. And now, reading her statement, the police officer for some reason again reiterated literally all the circumstances that she had already repeatedly disclosed. "Why didn't you go to the police immediately?" he asks. "You see, I was very tired, and it just didn't occur to me that it was necessary to do exactly that," Kate sighed. "The important thing is that you did it now," the duty officer replied. Mia didn't seem to realize it was about her. Or she did, but she didn't think much of it. Instead, she was looking at the room they were in with interest. Though, to Kate's mind, there was nothing fascinating or even simply beautiful about it. Nor could there be. "And what do you plan to do with the child?" the policeman asked after a moment's silence. "What do you mean?" Kate was surprised. The question had shocked her before it was asked. The woman sincerely believed that now the girl's fate was the responsibility of law enforcement officers. "Directly," answered the duty officer indifferently. "We can put her in a special institution, or let her stay with you for the time being." Kate's eyes darkened. The choice she was being offered was impossible. On the one hand, her husband had made it quite clear that she would not be here by this evening, and she realized that they couldn't afford another child. She could barely manage with her own. It was all understandable and logical. But the other side of the coin was in the word special institution, orphanage. It was unthinkable to let this girl go there. Kate remembered very well, despite the years that had passed, how difficult it had been for her to live and grow up in the orphanage, how she had had to endure the bullying of other children and the cruel punishments of the carers. For her, it was all in the past. She had endured and overcome everything. But she was born into a dysfunctional family and lost even the parents she had. She was used to hardship since she was a child. For her, this kind of treatment was the order of the day. Mia, on the other hand, was a completely different matter. It was immediately clear that she was a homely, loved, maybe even a little spoiled child, and also with an obvious mental trauma, since she did not remember her past, or even her real name. It was absolutely obvious to Kate that this girl simply would not survive in the harsh conditions of the orphanage. Of course, at that moment, the woman didn't have time to think long and hard. But it was undoubtedly her reflection that motivated her decision. Looking into the eyes of the duty officer, she answered firmly, "The girl will stay with us." "That's fine," the policeman replied. He had obviously expected such an answer, and when he received it, he suddenly opened up. "I'm from an orphanage myself, and I can see that this girl doesn't belong in such an institution." "That's what I thought," Kate said coldly. As a matter of fact, he went on, not noticing her tone, "It's not exactly in the rules to leave her with you, but I'll try to sort it out." "All right," the woman said. "Can we go now?" "Yes, of course. If anything comes to light about the little girl's relatives, we'll call you. But to tell you the truth, I'd advise you to start your own search. You know, sometimes the internet can do more than the police." When Kate finally got home, she found a distraught Sam there. He had already returned from school and grimaced as he showed his mother his diary, which contained a note about his lateness and the fact that the class teacher had called her in. "I'm sorry, Mum," the son said guiltily. "I should have got up myself in the morning." "No, you didn't," Kate replied. "You know it's my job to wake everyone up in the morning. Not because it's my job or anything like that, but because that's what we agreed. So I'm the one who should be apologizing to you." From their conversation, it would appear that no other girl was present in the flat. Sam, though he looked at her with some bewilderment, tactfully didn't ask any questions. Once again, Kate thought about how lucky she was to have a son who, unlike many, even the twins, had been a perfectly calm child in early childhood. Leaving the younger children in the care of the older ones, Kate set about preparing dinner. Then everyone sat down at the table. To the woman's surprise, Sam and Mia had somehow managed to become friends and were chatting animatedly about something of their own. It wasn't until after the meal, when the girl wasn't around, that her son approached her with an obvious question. "Mum, is Mia going to live with us now?" I asked her, but she doesn't know. "For now, yes," son, Kate replied. "The girl is lost and she needs help. If we don't take her in, she'll go to an orphanage." "It's a good thing she's staying," Sam concluded abruptly. "Why?" Mum wondered. The younger ones, like her Sam, told her seriously. So it'll be easier for you and me now. Kate laughed softly, ruffled his hair, and went about her usual chores: laundry, cleaning, preparing dinner for her husband. She preferred not to think about what would happen when he returned from work. However, the scandal exceeded all her expectations. "What is this?" he almost shouted, coming into the kitchen. "Are you not enough of your own? Some other girl picked up?" "She's not a girl." Kate stood up for the girl. "And anyway, it's only temporary until her parents are found. We can't let her end up in an orphanage. Look at her. She's a totally homeschooled kid. There's nothing for her there. There's an institution for people like her. She has nothing to do here," he interrupted. "Have you thought about our charity? How are we going to feed her, clothe her, and all the other costs of supporting a child? What do you know about child-related expenses?" Kate suddenly flared up, even to herself. "Have you ever bought anything for them? Do you have any idea what a child's needs are?" She didn't know what had prompted her to start this accusatory speech. Perhaps it was just a resentment that had built up in her soul over the years, and now she needed to vent it somewhere. Her husband listened to her angry confession unusually quietly, without interrupting or objecting. He must not have expected such pressure from his wife, usually affectionate, calm, even in conflict situations. And Kate kept talking and talking, expressing everything that had accumulated in her soul. And about the fact that the money that he earns, categorically not enough to live. And that it could have been avoided if he had got a job at once, instead of sitting on her dependence for several years. She even reminded him of the various excesses he allowed himself after the birth of their children, while she herself had to count the pennies he gave her to feed and clothe the whole family. She spoke, of course, not only about money, but also about how their relationship had deteriorated, how she missed the former love and romance. Not only and not so much flowers and gifts. Of course not. She'd like some simple human attention, and at least a little warmth and involvement instead of constant unfair reproaches. "Well," Alex said in a completely calm tone when Kate finally finished her monologue, "I understand that all of you will be much better without me than with me." This ominous phrase hung in the air, and the man, without saying another word, took out a large suitcase from the wardrobe in the room and began to pack his belongings into it. Kate, it would seem, should have, seeing this, started crying, apologizing, telling her husband how much she loved him, urging him not to make hasty decisions. And only 2 days ago she would have done so, but now she looked at what was happening with a coldness that killed her. Alex was getting ready at an emphasized leisurely pace and occasionally glanced at Kate. Obviously, he expected the usual reaction from her too, and most likely he wanted to scare the woman more than actually going to leave. If so, his plan hadn't worked. And once the suitcase was fully packed, there was nowhere to retreat to. "To hell with you." He threw angrily at his wife and slammed the front door behind him. Kate stood in the middle of the kitchen for a few more minutes, then waved goodbye and went into the nursery. There, Mia and Sam did their best to calm the younger children, obviously frightened by the ugly scene in the kitchen. The older ones were as pale as chalk, but, feeling responsible, tried not to panic. The woman hugged all 4 of them tightly. "Is Daddy not coming back?" Sam finally asked. Kate noted that there was not an ounce of regret or joy in his voice. He didn't really care whether Dad came back or not. He was just clarifying information. This man, who rarely came home, even on weekends, was almost a stranger to the children. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Maybe he'll come back in a while." So the 5 of them, the 4 children, and Kate herself began to live together. And if at first she feared that, without her husband's help, she would not be able to cope with such a crowd of hungry mouths, she soon discovered that this was not the case. On the contrary, without constant scandals and ridiculous demands to live much easier and calmer. This despite the fact that there was no money for household expenses. Alex allocated a very tiny amount from his salary, while Kate paid the bulk of them from her maternity and child allowances. However, there was a deadline when the money was going to run out, and that was a bit of a problem. Kate realized there was no way she could go full-time with 4 young children. But suddenly, with Alex gone, she had the energy and time to slowly start looking for part-time options. And here she was, helped by several happy accidents at once. First, she received a call from the headmistress of the kindergarten, where her children were waiting in line for admission, without saying anything specific over the phone. She urged Kate to come to the institution as soon as possible for a personal conversation. "Hello," the headmistress said when she met her. "I understand that you have been waiting for a long time for your children to be able to enter our kindergarten." "So long that one of them has already gone to school," Kate said, a little irritated. "I'll tell you a secret," the headmistress said. "By the time you get your turn, the younger ones will have already gone to school. A lot of people don't have a garden. Unfortunately, we have far more children than places." "Don't look at me like that. I didn't invent it, and it's not in my power to change it." "So, you called me here just to tell me we don't stand a chance?" "On the contrary, I called you here to suggest a solution to this problem. You see, we had another nanny leave the nursery some time ago. Nobody stays long, you know, and we can't find a new one. The rest of the staff are scrambling and about to leave. So I thought I should offer this vacancy to someone who has been waiting in line for a long time. I'll be honest, it's a lot of work and not much pay. But we can get your kids into an age-appropriate group right away." "And why are you offering it to me?" Kate asked suspiciously. "I don't even have a teaching degree. Surely there are more suitable candidates." "But you have 3 children of your own. Believe me, in the work that you have to do, it is much more important. However, I won't hide it. We also made such an offer to more suitable candidates, as you put it. But none of them accepted it. So we made a list of those who might be interested in such a deal, and you are not the first person I called about it. Does that answer satisfy you?" Kate was satisfied. Now she had some work to do, which could be combined with taking care of the younger children. The older ones were already independent enough to spend a few hours in the flat without her and cook their own lunch, especially since the kindergarten was not far from both their school and home. Of course, they didn't live too well, but not worse than before Alex left. Life was starting to get better. And after a while, a second good thing happened. This time, Kate was called in by the same police officer on duty who had taken her statement about finding Mia in the street a few weeks ago. "Any news about her parents?" Kate asked hopefully. "Alas, no news," the policeman replied. "Like I told you, we're not very good at this sort of thing, especially since the data set on her is minimal. Didn't you try looking for her yourself?" "I didn't have time for that," the woman shrugged her shoulders. "I have 3 of my own besides her, you know. And my husband left recently." "So it's understandable," the policeman sighed. "But in fact, I called you for a very specific reason. You see, I finally managed to formalize Mia's stay with you. That means you can put her in school and everything." "That's great," Kate glowed. The fact that Mia couldn't go to school really bothered the woman a lot. So far, she had been teaching her on her own, but she realized that the matter would have to be resolved before the next school year started. And summer was fast approaching, which meant that very soon the problem would become very acute. Yes, besides, you become the girl's legal guardian. That, of course, comes with certain benefits. Plus, as I understand it, you'll qualify for certain allowances and benefits as a mother of many children. It worked out exactly as he said. Of course, money was always in short supply, but now, at least, Kate could be sure that the children would be clothed, fed, and educated. Contrary to her fears, life without Alex hadn't collapsed, not only financially, but emotionally as well. No matter how hard she tried, she was still unable to experience any feelings about his departure. Something in her must have faded at the very moment when her husband rashly accused her of infidelity, which was not the case. Such a reaction was very surprising to Kate herself. But for all that, she couldn't help but be pleased. With 4 children in her arms, it would be a shame to suffer for a love that had collapsed. On the other hand, perhaps the children contributed to her peace of mind. With all her worries, she had no time for sadness and despair. So 2 more years passed. For the convenience of all members of the family, the flat was conditionally divided into 2 halves, male and female. Mia and the youngest Tracy moved into Kate's room, where the adults used to live. Sam stayed in his room with his brother Cole. It was cramped, of course, but so far it hadn't caused any particular problems. Mia and Sam's friendship was growing stronger every day. They went to the same school now. True, the girl was a grade below them. The boy treated her like another little sister and looked after her in every possible way. With the younger children, she also had a great relationship. In short, despite her unexpected appearance, she perfectly fit into the family. Kate herself fell in love with the girl as her own daughter, and sometimes even forgot that this is not true. Mia, in turn, quite quickly got used to calling the woman Mum, and her children brothers and sisters. The day on which the little girl was discovered, they had amicably decided to consider it her birthday. It seemed quite symbolic to Kate. After all, who knows what might have happened to Mia if she hadn't caught her eye in time. In a way, it could be said that Alex's horrible scene that night had saved her from a much sadder fate. And while Kate was glad that Mia was now her daughter, she couldn't figure out if anyone was looking for her. On the advice of a policeman, she repeatedly advertised for the child, but to no avail. The police also did not succeed in finding her parents. Adding to the worry was the fact that the girl had never regained her true memories. It seemed that until the moment she woke up in the park, she simply did not exist in this world, which of course there was no way that could be true. And Kate really wanted to know what it was really like. But the various doctors at the public health center had just thrown up their hands. They had never dealt with such complicated cases and had no idea what to do. The only thing that one of the doctors was able to do was to give the contacts of a good private clinic specializing in helping children with memory loss. But the family, of course, had no money for that. Mia herself did not seem in the least disturbed by the lack of memories of the past. She was childishly naive and lived today, and knew only that this day is good for her. And what had been there before was not so important. Kate couldn't understand that either, and even envied her adopted daughter in some white way. She herself at her age wanted to know who her parents were and why they were no longer with her. And as a result, she so annoyed the tutor with her questions that she answered her honestly and directly they were drunkards, unnecessary and useless, just like you yourself. Then they died. And you fell on our heads. Did you get what you wanted? Happy? Now go clean the toilets. It's your turn today. Thinking back on the episode, Kate sometimes thought that maybe it was a good thing that Mia had no interest in her past. On the other hand, when the woman had found her, she hadn't looked at all like a kid who'd had a lot of bad luck in this life. Quite the opposite, in fact. And the thought often crossed her mind that it might have been much more comfortable and pleasant for the girl to live with her own family than with them. However, one way or another, Kate could not change anything in this situation, although she made every effort to do so. In the end, she resigned herself to the idea that they would never know the whole truth. And perhaps it was at that moment that she finally decided that the girl was not just temporarily living with her, but was a full-fledged member of her family. And then there was a question of not just being her guardian, but to fully adopt the child. And here she encountered a funny, and at the same time sad legal subtlety. Still in an official marriage, she could not do it without her husband's consent. That meant only one thing: she had to get a divorce. With a heavy heart, Kate dialed Alex's number. She didn't want to talk to the man, and she would have been much more willing to do it through the courts. But such a process would take much longer, and the woman hoped that her husband, with whom she hadn't had any contact for 2 years, would agree to just peacefully file a petition and go their separate ways, not only in fact, but also officially. Katie, she heard Alex's affectionate voice in the phone. "I'm so glad you finally called me. You have no idea how much I've missed you." Kate was taken aback. On the one hand, something hurt and at the same time sweetly pricked her heart. It was the way he'd spoken to her before the horror of what had happened to them. And for a moment, it was as if she were back in those happy times. On the other hand, it sounded so inappropriate now. "I know you miss me too, and you'll make the right decision in the end," Alex continued inspiringly. "You can't just leave your husband because of some street girl. You're calling to tell me that this problem is solved and I can come back. All the happy memories are gone." With the last phrase, her husband vividly reminded Kate of the reason why, when he left, she wasn't even too upset. So she replied in the coldest possible tone, "Alex, I'm calling to ask you for a divorce." "So you found a new man?" His voice immediately lost all viscosity. "That was quick, I'll give you that." "I didn't find anyone. It's none of your business. Not since you left me alone with 4 kids. Like you said, we got along just fine without you. And now I'd like to settle this last formality." "I didn't leave you," my husband said indignantly. "I just couldn't stay in the same flat with that girl, and I wasn't in a position to carry another child, so I've withdrawn from your life until you solve this problem." "Believe me, I've solved all my problems except the one I'm calling you about." Let's end this pointless conversation, Alex. I don't need you or my kids anymore. Well, he sounded really angry. In that case, sue me. I won't give you a divorce. But I suggest you think twice before you do it. And for example, remember that the flat you and I bought in marriage. It's a jointly acquired property. And now I have to live with my parents, who are not too keen on having me here. You see where I'm going with this? With these words, he hung up the phone. Kate couldn't believe what she'd heard. Would he really not give her a divorce? Moreover, he threatened to deprive her and the children of their only home if she decided to do so. Was this really the romantic and loving young man she had once married? But she had nowhere to retreat. After a few more attempts to negotiate peacefully with her husband, she realized it was all useless. Either she gets rid of Mia and Alex returns home, or divorce through the court with the division of the flat. He wouldn't hear of any other options. I realize you still need time to come to your senses, he said in one of those conversations. And I'm in no hurry to make a decision. But since you've deigned to talk to me, I'm waiting for your decision. And even my patience isn't unlimited. Kate herself didn't want to drag this all out, maintaining a kind of status quo. It was clear that this issue could not be suspended indefinitely. It had to be dealt with right now. After all, Mia's formal adoption was also a kind of formality, just like this divorce. That's true. But what if, for example, she wanted to remarry? In the end, Kate made up her mind after all and applied to the court. Before doing so, she did one thing. She tried to explain to the children in terms they could understand that their living conditions could soon become even worse than they were before. And for a while at least, they would all have to live in a one-room flat. To her surprise and delight, everyone was sympathetic to such a decision. Alex kept his word and really tried to claim his share of the flat. However, unexpectedly, the court rejected his claim. The judge referred to the fact that all their children live in the flat with their mother. In addition, there is also the only place of residence of another child. Therefore, it is impossible to divide the flat in any way, except in the case if a part of children the former father will take to itself on permanent residence and education. There was an ominous silence in the hall. The children were too young for their opinion and desire to be taken into account by the court. Consequently, at this point, everything depended on Alex's answer. For a few minutes, he looked triumphantly at his former spouse. She understood that he didn't need children, but for the sake of torturing his nerves, he might agree to this proposal. And then they would face many months of new litigation, fighting for the children, which of course he would lose. But all of this will take time and money away from Kate, not to mention the stress. However, her husband apparently decided that he did not need these problems either, and agreed that the children let them stay with their mother, but in this case he is entitled to compensation in the amount of the market value of his share of the flat. The court agreed with this. However, given Kate's small income and the number of her dependents, she would have to pay this money in small sums over many years. Not that this decision satisfied any of the parties. Nevertheless, it was the only possible compromise. In Kate's family, this state of affairs was considered an absolute victory. The children, however she had prepared them, were terrified of the legal process, and especially of the prospect of being separated and forced to live with a father whom the younger ones did not even remember. And now that it was all behind them, the boys were jubilant. Besides, being a completely free woman and Mia's legal guardian, Kate, though not without difficulty, was able to get the girl officially adopted. This was the occasion for a big, by their standards, holiday. Inexpensive but tasty cake from the shop and a trip to the amusement park were to be its indispensable attributes. None of us have ever been to such a place in our lives, she told the children. But of course, each of you has dreamed of going there at least once. For 3 months, the woman saved up the little money she had. She spent all the money she could to save up for this trip and to give her children a real entertainment. And now the big day has come. The kids looked around with interest, trying to choose which of the various entertainments they would like to experience. Of course, trying everything at once was out of the question, and luckily even the little ones were well aware of these limitations. Only Mia, usually boisterous and cheerful, was unusually quiet. She was looking around with a strange expression on her face, as if she was wondering why she was in this place. But it was a very different kind of wonder from everyone else's. Mia paid little attention to the rides themselves. They seemed familiar to her. "Mia, are you all right?" Kate asked her. concerned about the girl's atypical behavior. "Yes, I'm fine," she replied in a quiet and colorless voice. This startled the woman even more. The tone of the child's voice was completely at odds with the meaning of her words, which was completely uncharacteristic of Mia. Open and trusting, she was not used to hiding her emotions. That's why her attempt to do so was a complete failure and alarmed her foster mother even more. Nevertheless, Kate did not continue the dialogue. She knew perfectly well that if Mia had any reason to try to hide her feelings, then no matter how much she questioned her, she would only succeed in making the girl even more withdrawn. Otherwise, there was a good chance that she would want to share her feelings. And that's what happened. Kate's own children, completely mesmerized by the surroundings, did not notice anything around them and argued passionately about which attraction should be tried first. Finally, they came to a common decision and went to the Ferris wheel. Mia suddenly refused to go with them, citing her fear of heights. No one tried to talk her out of it. She and Kate sat down on a bench, where they had a clear view of the cart the others had sat in, all the way round. An awkward silence reigned for some time. Then the girl interrupted it with a phrase which her foster parent least expected to hear. "Mum, don't be angry with me," she began, and then broke off half-heartedly, trying to see Kate's reaction in her eyes. "Was I ever angry with you?" she replied in surprise. "No," Mia said, embarrassed. "Well, you can now." "Why?" "Sunshine. What's wrong?" "You know, ever since we came to this park, I feel like I know it, like I've been here before. Maybe you have. It's not like I'm her again." Kate felt a sense of joyous anticipation. Could it be that memories are starting to come back for the girl? Could it be that her real parents really did take her to this particular park, or just a similar one, and now the surroundings are helping her recover her memory? "So why should I be angry about it?" Kate said. "What if something you all remember about your childhood and your other parents? So what's the harm in that? Because then we'll know exactly what happened to you. Maybe we can even find those people and let them know that you're okay. But then they'd probably want to take me away," Mia exclaimed, almost terrified. "It won't be that easy," Kate tried to reassure her. "You're 9 years old, maybe more. We don't even know that for sure. You've seen for yourself the other day that a trial isn't a quick process, and you can't do without it once you're 10. You can decide what kind of family you want to live with, and then maybe you'll like your birth parents better than me." "No," Mia pouted. "How can you know that?" "They abandoned me," she said with a childish firmness. "Maybe they didn't abandon you, but lost you and can't find you," Kate said. "I'm used to you anyway, you and your brothers and sister. I've been trying hard not to remember anything for a long time now, so that. Mia couldn't find the right words. Kate understood her perfectly well enough, so that she wouldn't have to make that impossible choice. I mean, she probably loved her real parents too, and if she remembered them, the feelings might return. But her new family was already practically her own. "Look," Kate said as gently as she could. "You may think there are only 2 options, but there are so many more. If we find your real parents, you don't have to say goodbye to us forever. You'll be able to visit us, play with your brothers and sister, and do it quite often, I assure you." Mia rounded her eyes. It seemed that such an option had never occurred to her at all, but now her thoughts were flowing in that direction. And the girl calmed down a little, realizing that things were not as hopeless as she had imagined. Unfortunately, Kate could not say the same about herself. She was not at all sure that her own soothing words were true. There was no telling how long the conversation would have gone on, or where it would have led, had it not been interrupted in a rather unceremonious manner. A man dressed in an amusement park employee's uniform approached them. He had a broom in his hands, and he didn't look the most welcoming. Nevertheless, when he spoke, his words sounded polite and without any aggression. "Hello. I apologize, but your daughter looked very familiar. Isn't that Emily by any chance?" When she heard that name, the girl perked up. From the outside, she was like a lost dog who in the casual conversation of strangers heard her name. She stared intently at the park worker, as if trying to remember if she had met him before. "You see, here's the thing," Kate said, choosing her words carefully. "We don't know for sure, and we can't rule out that it is her. The fact is that this girl was found about 3 years ago, quite far from this place. She was wandering the street at a very childlike time. Remembered absolutely nothing of her past and unfortunately still doesn't to this day. If you really know her. Kate continued, but the park worker interrupted her. 3 years ago. He exclaimed in a daze. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's when I or anyone else last saw the girl I'm talking about. Of course, she looked much younger then, but the resemblance is striking. Tell me the story from the beginning, Kate suggested. At that time, the children who had been on the Ferris wheel returned. However, the eldest son Alex realized from the mere look of his mother that something serious was going on, and it was not worth interfering with the conversation. He diverted the attention of the younger children to some attraction, and then carefully led them away. They used to come here a lot, you see. The Petrov family, the park worker, finally began. But I learned later that they were called that: a father, a mother, and a little girl. They came here almost every week. And then they disappeared. But I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe they found another park they liked better, or something. That's when the entertainment stuff started sprouting up all over the city like mushrooms after a rainstorm. And then what happened? Mia asked, listening to him as if mesmerized. And then I saw an advert in the paper that this girl was missing. The parents were offering a lot of money for any information about her whereabouts, but as I understand it, they never found her. Do you have, I don't know, a copy of the paper? Kate asked with a mixture of fear and hope. There's no copy of the newspaper, the park employee replied. But if you're interested in the contacts of these people, I've kept them just in case. In case I see or hear something. Digging a little in his pocket, he pulled out an old mobile phone, found the number and dictated it to Kate. It would be nice if you turned out to be Emily, he said to Mia one last time. Her parents, as far as I could see, adored her. Mia and Kate returned home in a strange, agitated state. Perhaps the solution to the mystery that had plagued both of them for 3 years was right in their hands. But neither of them knew where its unraveling would lead. Shrewd Sam, of course, noticed that something was wrong. But he didn't ask any questions. Instead, he diverted his attention away from the younger Jake and Kyle, so they wouldn't pester him. Kate spent several days in a row with the phone in her hands, dialing the number she wanted, then quickly dropping it before the call could go through. It wasn't even that she was afraid of what she might find out. It was just that she had no idea how to start this difficult conversation. But at some point, gathering her strength, she did take that decisive step into the unknown. Hello, what can I do for you? After a few beeps, a pleasant male voice answered her. Hello, Kate said. Then she exhaled sharply and continued, my name is Kate, and I'm calling about your daughter, who disappeared about 3 years ago. What? The polite, neutral, friendly tone of the interlocutor immediately changed. The man was obviously stunned by what he heard and had no idea how to react, whether to be happy, or indignant, or frightened. You see, the thing is, there is some possibility that she has been in my care all this time. And just recently she was adopted by me, Kate continued. I can't say for sure, Kate continued, because for some reason she had lost her memory and had no idea of her relatives. I don't want to get your hopes up, but a few days ago she seemed to be recognized by an amusement park worker. I think you and I should meet and talk it over. The man replied gruffly, you're right. But I'd prefer the first meeting to take place without the girl's participation. Why disturb her and you unnecessarily? I agree, Kate replied. Only a few hours had passed when Kate, terribly worried, entered one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. A man was already waiting for her at the indicated table. He was perhaps 10 years older than she was, which did not affect his attractiveness. Even in such an environment, Kate couldn't help noticing that he looked absolutely gorgeous. Hello again, she said, taking a seat across from him. He nodded silently, either not wanting to say anything or unable to. Without saying a word, he took out a folder from his business briefcase and, placing it on the table, carefully moved it towards her. Kate, in turn, handed him some simple film photographs of Mia. Opening the folder, Kate found that the stranger had the same idea in his mind as she had. He had brought several pictures of his daughter, apparently taken shortly before her disappearance at the very same amusement park. In one of the pictures, she posed in the pink dress she had been wearing the night Kate had found her on the street. There was no doubt about it. It was Mia in the images. Kate had no pictures of the girl from the same period. Only the most recent pictures, taken with a recently acquired cheap camera bought offhand from one of the classified sites. Despite this, the man obviously recognized his daughter unmistakably. "It's Emily," he whispered. "My God, she's alive. And as far as I know, perfectly healthy. Except for the memory loss. I'm afraid it's true that I had no way of providing the standard of living to which she was accustomed. But the alternative was an orphanage, and I felt that even my modest two-room flat on the outskirts was better than that." The man fell into silence again. Kate did not hurry him. She roughly understood the storm going on in the man's soul. At last, Kate calmed down a little, and the man was able to state his thoughts more or less coherently. The first thing he said was quite unexpected. "I never introduced myself, did I? My name is Jack. Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you," Kate replied in a casual tone. I'm sorry, I'm in a bit of a state of shock right now. But anyway, I must thank you for taking my little girl in. I've been trying to find her parents for quite a while, but I guess I missed you somehow," she began cautiously. "You, I understand, mostly placed adverts in newspapers, and I put them on the internet. I didn't even think about the internet, and no one told me. Although I was always told I was too modern, especially for my age." "Did you report it to the police?" "I did, of course," he sighed, "but they couldn't find anything." "That's strange, because I went to the police first. But the officer told me at the time that it was unlikely they would be able to do anything. I didn't know her name, and it must be necessary for them to check through their channels." Kate darkened visibly. "Speaking of which, you said she's lost her memory?" "Unfortunately, yes," Jack replied. "I took her to the doctors, but there was nothing they could do. It's true that when we were in that very park, it was as if she began to vaguely recognize the place. Maybe if she sees me, it'll trigger the rest of her memories." I'd like to believe that Jack said with another heavy sigh. "But there's another problem, you see." "What do you mean?" "You see, the girl has lived in our family like a family member. She became very attached to me, and perhaps more importantly, to my children. And I'm going to insist that they keep in touch. Unless, of course, you intend to take her in." Suddenly, Jack was very specific. "You're not very well off, are you?" "I'm not ashamed of it," Kate said. "And I can assure you that Emily, gets everything she needs to live." "Yeah, that's what I'm getting at," Jack said. "I just think I have an offer for you that will suit all parties. Unless, of course, you're too attached to your job." "What exactly are you proposing?" "Well, you see, I'm a lonely, busy man, and I'm not sure I can devote the time I need to my child. You see, after everything that's happened, I've been so busy. I have a big mansion in the suburbs," Jack said. "You can move in with the kids and be my live-in nanny. Don't worry about school. You can send your kids there with your own driver. By the way, there's an upscale institution just down the road. I think we can get not only Emily there, but her new siblings as well." "You said you have several siblings, right?" 3, Kate confirmed. "And 2 of them are due to start school this year." "So you're in?" "It's a very tempting offer," Kate said thoughtfully. "There's just one thing I don't understand. That park worker said that you always came there in 3s. Where's your wife?" Jack lowered his eyes to the table, but Kate could see tears glistening in his eyes. Only now did she realize how tactless her question had been. They'd lost the baby. Perhaps they thought the girl was dead. There was no telling what could happen to a mother under such circumstances. "You see," Jack said, getting over his emotions rather quickly, "Emily was a late child, very much wanted and loved. My wife and I wanted a big family, but it didn't work out for a long time. And then, finally, our daughter came along. The doctors said that the second birth Jessica's body simply could not withstand. And then our only daughter went missing. And now she's found. My poor wife was only a few months away from that moment. She got sick right after Emily went missing. And now she's gone." "I'm sorry," Kate said quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss." He nodded and took a sip of water from the glass. They sat in awkward silence for a few painful minutes, and then, wanting to change the subject to something less painful, They began discussing the details of the move and Mia's meeting with her birth father. As a result, Kate returned home with a clear plan of action. Her own children took the move to the huge Smith mansion as a magical adventure. Even Sam, always reserved and serious beyond his years, almost jumped for joy. Mia alone showed no signs of happiness. She still didn't remember her father and was afraid to meet him. She was also visibly upset by the news of her mother's death. "I don't remember her now," she said to Kate. "And I'm not even sad." "But if I did, I'd probably be very sad," Mia said. "That's why I chose to tell you now, so you'd be ready when you remember," Kate answered her. It took another 2 weeks before the family was completely ready to move. And now, finally, the day had come when Mia was to meet her birth daddy. Everyone involved in witnessing the event, except for the little twins Taylor and Ryan, were terribly excited. Even Sam was visibly worried about his sister. Jack had organized the transport of their belongings. He sent his personal driver to pick up the family. All the way the girl sat on pins and needles, twirling, bouncing, and unable to concentrate on anything. However, when they drove out of town, she suddenly froze, looking out the window as if she recognized the scenery outside. As soon as the car pulled up to the mansion, she shrieked loudly. Jack was just as worried as his daughter, waiting for them right on the doorstep. The girl got out of the car and froze, looking either at him or at the house. Her father stepped forward, but hesitated, and in the end he stayed where he was, shuffling nervously from foot to foot. She walked over to him and said in a questioning tone, "Daddy?" "Emily, my daughter, do you remember me?" He could see that he was restraining the urge to hug the child so as not to frighten her. After all, he was well aware that he was probably nothing more than a strange uncle to her now. Even though she had been informed that he was her father, she probably didn't remember or feel it. Vaguely, said the girl. "It's like I'm remembering something, but no. Maybe I just made it up in the first place." And unable to withstand the heat of emotion, she cried. Kate and Sam came running over to her and wrapped her in a tight hug. "It's okay," her foster mother said. "It's all right, my daughter. Give yourself time. You'll remember everything. Let's not rush things." The last phrase was addressed to Jack. He, however, did not think to take action, realizing the complexity of the situation. Abruptly turning round, he went into the house, gesturing for the new residents to follow him. The family had already been living in the mansion for a month, and the girl's memory had not even begun to recover. From time to time, she remembered fragments of the story, but she couldn't tell if they were true or figments of her imagination. Finally, Jack and Kate decided that it was time to seek professional help. By some miracle, the woman found a business card of a private clinic, which had once been left to her by one of the doctors of the city hospital. Jack could afford to pay for the services of its specialists, and Mia began to visit the facility on a regular basis. "Don't expect immediate results," one of the doctors warned them. "It can take many months or even years to regain memory, especially if it was lost as a result of a dramatic incident." "Do you think she suffered some kind of trauma?" Jack asked worriedly. "I mean psychological trauma," the doctor explained. "Our examination showed no physical injuries, but the very fact that she was lost could be what blocked her memory, especially if she had time to decide that she was never coming home again. A defense mechanism of sorts, if you like. And now we have to convince her brain that it doesn't need it anymore." That night, after putting the kids to bed, Kate knocked on Jack's room. He was sitting at his desk writing something in a thick notebook. "Do you need something?" he asked politely. "Jack, I've been meaning to ask you something, but I've been hesitating. Tell me how Emily disappeared." "Call her by her usual name if you like. She doesn't respond to Emily anyway. It's not certain she ever will. As for the circumstances of her disappearance, I don't really know much about it. My wife and I put her to bed that evening. In the morning, she was gone. We searched the house and the neighborhood, but we found nothing. There were no security cameras either at our place or on the road at that time, but we found no trace of strangers in the house. It's as if she left on her own of her own accord. But she had no reason, as far as I can see, to do so." "Not as far as I know," Jack replied. "It's been 6 months of treatment at the clinic, and it's finally yielded its first results, and most happily for the girl's father. She finally remembered him. It was early in the morning when a pleased Mia ran down the stairs to the living room where Jack was having breakfast and embraced him in her arms. This, of course, in no way canceled her love and affection for her new family. It was only now that she was really glad that they all lived in one spacious house. From then on, she began to answer to both her names. And when it was time for her to get a passport, she insisted that they both be registered there. From that day on, her memory gradually returned to her. The girl recalled some episodes from her childhood, her mother, neighborhood children with whom she liked to play. By the time she was 14, she remembered everything but one thing. What exactly happened the day she went missing, and how she managed to end up on the other side of town. It wasn't until another 2 years later that those memories began to come back to her as well. Not all at once, very gradually. At first in the form of some vague images that came mostly in dreams, but gradually they became clearer and clearer until they finally formed into one coherent picture. And it was then that Mia Emily finally managed to tell her parents everything. The solution was ridiculously simple and trivial. "I went to get the kitten," she said. "What kitten?" Kate wondered. "A white one, so beautiful. It was in our yard and I couldn't sleep, so I watched it from the window. And then he left the yard and I wondered where he was going, so I climbed out of the window. My room was on the ground floor, so I followed him. I thought it wouldn't be far, I'd just take one look. I came out of the courtyard and he was gone. I went one way, I went the other. I tried to find him, but he was nowhere to be found. He must have run off somewhere to do his cat thing. Or maybe he was just out for a walk and went home. I was about to too, when I realized I wasn't going to find the cat anyway." "So you just got lost?" John wondered. "Yeah, that's how it works. And apparently trying to get back, I started walking further and further away from home. By morning I reached the town. I was cold, of course, tired and hungry. I decided I could take a bus. I've seen them here, they run here. And I went the wrong way, of course. And to tell you the truth, it was probably the wrong bus. So I wandered around the city for days and got to the other end of it. That's where, as I understand it, nobody thought to look for me. I didn't sleep the whole time, I was afraid. But at some point my body couldn't take it, and I fell asleep right on a bench in the park. And when I woke up, I didn't remember anything. I went wherever I was going. And then my mom met me. That's the whole story." Around the same time that Mia Emily's memories came back, John and Kate decided to get married. Living in the same house, they became very close and found quite a few common interests. And Kate's own children have long perceived her new husband as their father. He answered them in the same way. Kate fulfilled her childhood dream again, entered the Institute at the Faculty of Economics and graduated with honors. After that, her husband gladly took her to work in his company. The woman sold her second flat, having fully paid off Alex for his share in this living space. So they lived as a big, friendly family in the huge mansion, which was now theirs. As a memento of their adventures, Mia Emily brought a huge white cat from somewhere. The street animal required a long course of treatment. Her parents grumbled about her daughter's reckless act, but they kept the cat. Very soon he became a favorite in the house.